Sarah Wynne was at her shell cabinet at the south parlour of the Aberystwyth parsonage, cataloguing a Cardigan Bay, queen scallop she had gathered at the Friday before low tide at the Pierfoot Rocks. The boy with the Cardiganshire Express knocked twice at the south door. She set the queen scallop gentle at the velvet cabinet tray and crossed to the south door at the level step. Sarah Wynne was tall, 5'6", upright, with the gentle gravity of the Cardigan Bay parsonage, soft dark hair plaited at the nape under a plain dark mourning cap, calm grey eyes the colour of the Taaffe estuary at autumn, fair Welsh coast complexion, in unrelieved black mourning gabardine for her late great-aunt the testatrix. The express boy laid the folded letter to her ungloved hand and stepped back to the gravel. The cool Welsh coast November air came in through the south door behind him. The Cardiganshire crimson wafer seal lay heavy at her ungloved palm. She broke it at the threshold. The soft, hard click of the seal was the only sound at the parlour. The first 4 lines named her late great-aunt Mrs. Honoria Wynne of Wynne Court, widow of Sir Augustus Wynne, 3rd Baronet, dead at her country seat, Friday, November 12th, last at the 72nd year of her age, and named Sarah Sole Heiress. The solicitor's hand was Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen of Key Street, Carmarthen. Mrs. Tregoron, the parsonage cook, was at the south parlour door. She declared at her gentle Welsh worry that surely Miss Sarah should faint. The estate-keeping at Wynne Court was no work for a curate's daughter, and Sir Octavius de Vere of de Vere Park should have the hall by Lady Day. "Octavius shall have it," said her sticky label voice. "Octavius shall have it." Sarah did not answer her. She turned back to the shell cabinet at the south sash. The cabinet stood at her right hand, 3 Tunbridge-bound shelves of 47 Cardigan Bay species at the velvet trays. Mr. William Turton's Conchological Dictionary of the Present Year, 1819, stood open at the Queen Scallop page at the right of the cabinet. Mr. Montague's Testacea Britannica of 1803 stood at the left at the British Coast Scallop chapter. The warm beeswax of the candle shone level upon the small brass caliper. Sarah drew the queen scallop again and finished the cataloguing. She measured the shell at the hinge with the caliper, 33 parts of an inch at the long axis, 27 at the short, and laid the caliper at the tray. She drew the green calf conchology journal to her hand and wrote at the head of the open page in her even script, Aquapectin opicularis, Queen Scallop, Cardigan Bay, Pierfoot Rocks, Friday, November 19th, 1819. Finished at the Aberystwyth parsonage, south parlour, Saturday, November 20th. The Cardiganshire Express at 10:30. 2 questions stood at her hand. The first was the matter of the paper alluded to at the foot of Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's letter, as a paper requiring the Prerogative Court's notice at the Tuesday following chambers, reading at Carmarthen. The second was whether the conchology at the shell cabinet should continue at Wynne Court at the South Library, or be set down at the Aberystwyth parsonage at the present hour. Neither the cool November light at the south sash nor the warm beeswax of the candle at the cabinet should answer at the present hour. Mrs. Tregoron at the south parlour door had her sticky label murmur at her mouth still, "Octavius shall have it," and Sarah did not turn at the murmur. Sarah read Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's letter the second time at the writing table beside the cabinet. The solicitor had set out at the second page that her great-aunt's last will and testament had been admitted to probate at the Prerogative Court at Carmarthen on the Friday morning previous, that he begged Sarah to come down to Key Street at the chambers reading of the Tuesday of the 23rd of November, that he should have the will and the housekeeper's keys and the 3% bank draft at her hand at the chambers, and that a folded paper had been lodged on the Friday afternoon at the Prerogative Court at Carmarthen by one Sir Ranulph de Vere of de Vere Park, near Cardigan, claiming a parole trust over half of the Wynne estate, founded upon some matter at the South Library of Wynne Court at the September of 1818. The solicitor did not set out the substance of the claim. He set out only that the paper had been lodged and that the matter should be heard out at chambers. Sarah drew a sheet of the parsonage letter paper to her hand and wrote one line in her even script in answer. "I shall attend at your chambers at Key Street at the Tuesday following. Sarah Wynne, Saturday, November 20th, 1819, Aberystwyth Parsonage." She folded the sheet, set the parsonage wax to it, addressed it to Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at Key Street, Carmarthen, and laid it at the south parlour table for the noon Carmarthen post. The Cardigan Bay parsonage fell into the cool grey hush of the Welsh coast November morning at the south sash. The Queen Scallop lay at the velvet cabinet tray. The Turton and the Montague stood at the cabinet at their open pages. The small brass caliper lay at the tray beside the shell, and the green calf conchology journal stood open at the writing table at the even script she had set down. Sarah sat at the parlour table a long Cardigan Bay while. She had never been at Wynne Court. She had never been down to the Tafy estuary, nor to the parish of Wynne by the Tafy. Her late great-aunt had been at the court these 40 years since her marriage to Sir Augustus Wynne in the warm summer of 1779. She had corresponded with the late Reverend Octavius Wynne at the 4 quarter-days of every year throughout, and had at every Lady Day return from the year of 1812 onward an account of Sarah's shell cabinet work at the south parlour at Aberystwyth. The Reverend Octavius had not himself been over to Wynne since the autumn of 1809 at Sir Augustus's death, the curacy at St. Michael's standing at his hand throughout. Mrs. Honoria had not in Sarah's lifetime come up to the Aberystwyth parsonage, and Sarah had not in Mrs. Honoria's lifetime come down to the Tafy. The reason of this Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's letter did not set out, and Sarah at the parlour table did not press the question. The Sunday following Sarah kept at the parsonage at the careful, settled manner her father the late Reverend Octavius Wynne had set. She went down to St. Michael's at the morning office, and again at the evening prayer. The cool grey of the Cardigan Bay coast lay over the parsonage at the dusk. She did not work at the shell cabinet at the Sunday. The Turton and the Montague stood open at the cabinet at the south sash, and the Queen Scallop lay at the velvet tray, and the small brass caliper lay beside it, and the green calf conchology journal stood at its even script at the writing table. The Tuesday of the 23rd of November came over the Cardigan Bay in the soft pale grey of an early Welsh winter. Sarah crossed by the Aberystwyth Carmarthen post-chaise, the 40 miles south at the morning departure, the green calf conchology journal at the small leather satchel at her hand, and Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's letter folded at the inner pocket of the satchel. The chaise took the level Cardigan Bay road south by Aberavon and New Quay and Llandysol, and came up at Key Street at the noon stage. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's chambers stood at the upper side of the Key Street close, in the level limestone and slate of an old Carmarthen chambers, the south windows giving out upon the Towy estuary. The Towy ran level at the slack of the tide at the south sash. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen received her at the south parlour of the chambers in the plain dark wool of a 60-year solicitor. He was a level man, gold spectacles, plain Carmarthen cravat, hands at the side table where the will lay open at the candle. He set Sarah at the chair at the south sash and drew the will to his hand. The cool grey Carmarthen light lay level upon the page at the candle. Sarah set her hand at the green calf cover of the conchology journal at her satchel, and gave Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen her settled attention. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen read the verbatim will aloud at the south parlour of the chambers in the level Carmarthen manner of an old prerogative court reader. He read the first words at the head of the page. In the name of God. Amen. I, Honoria Mary Wynne, widow of Wynne Court in the parish of Wynne by the Teifi in the county of Cardigan, being of sound and disposing mind, memory and understanding, do hereby make and ordain this my last will and testament in the manner following. Firstly, I commit my soul to Almighty God, my Maker, and I direct that my body be decently interred in the chancel of the parish church of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Teifi, beside that of my late husband, Sir Augustus Wynne, 3rd Baronet, with no further pomp than is fitting to a widow of the Cardigan Bay coast. Secondly, I give, devise and bequeath unto my great niece Sarah Wynne, only surviving child of my late nephew, the Reverend Octavius Wynne, lately curate of St. Michael's of Aberystwyth, the whole of my real and personal estate, situate at Wynne by the Teifi aforesaid, comprising the dwelling house called Wynne Court, together with 152 acres of home pasture upon the south cliff top above the Teifi estuary, the walled south garden of half an acre with the shell grotto at the south wall, the apple orchard at the east, and all appurtenances thereto belonging, the contents of the South Library being 376 volumes, principally classical and historical, and of the Cardigan Bay Coast School, the Wynne family plate of 78 pieces, marked Carmarthen 1788, and all household goods, chattels, linen and furniture standing at the court at the date of these presents. Thirdly, I give and bequeath unto the said Sarah Wynne the further sum of £3,300 sterling, standing in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England in my name at the date of these presents. Fourthly, I give and bequeath unto the said Sarah Wynne my own shell cabinets, kept at the South Library of Wynne Court, from the Lady Day of the year 1789 to the present October of the year 1819, being the Cardigan Bay Coast collection of 30 years standing at my hand, together with the whole of my correspondence with Mr. William Turton of Swansea and Mr. George Montague, touching the British Coast Conchology, bound at the South Library writing table at the same dates. The whole of these bequests are to be held by her in fee, simple absolute, to her own sole and separate use, without let or hindrance of any person whatsoever. Fifthly, I give to my faithful housekeeper, Mrs. Mare Gwynfrin, the sum of £50 and the plum bombazine standing at the housekeeper's wardrobe. To my faithful steward, Mr. Penmain Coast, the sum of £50 and the standing dark coat at the steward's room. To my faithful butler, Mr. Aberporth, the sum of £30 and the standing tailcoat at the butler's pantry, and to the parish curate, the Reverend Price Aaron of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Teifi, the sum of £20, to be laid out at the parish school of the parish, at his settled discretion. Sixthly and lastly, I do hereby nominate and appoint Mr. Owain Glyndwr Carmarthen of Key Street, Carmarthen Solicitor, to be sole executor of this my last will and testament, and I revoke all former wills by me at any time heretofore made. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and seal at Wynne Court in the parish of Wynne by the Teifi, aforesaid this 14th day of October in the year of our Lord, 1819. Honoria Mary Wynne. Signed, sealed, published, and declared by the above-named Honoria Mary Wynne as and for her last will and testament, in the presence of us who, at her request, and in her presence, and in the presence of each other, have hereunto subscribed our names as witnesses. Price Aaron, Clerk in Holy Orders, Curate of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Teifi, Penman Coast, Steward of Wynne Court. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen set the will at the side table and turned to Sarah at the south sash. The cool grey Carmarthen light lay level upon the page and upon the gold spectacles at his nose. He drew across the side table 5 several items at her hand. The first was a fair copy of the will at his clerk's even hand, folded twice, ribbon-bound at the foot. The second was a brass ring of 6 keys: the south porch, the south library, the steward's room, the plate room, the housekeeper's still room, and the shell grotto at the walled south garden. The third was the £3,300 bank draft at the 3%, drawn upon the Bank of England at Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's hand. The fourth was a sealed personal letter from Mrs. Honoria to Sarah in the Cardiganshire crimson wax of the Wynne seal, unbroken. The fifth was the Reverend Price Aaron's calling card of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen set the 5 items at her hand and said at the level Carmarthen manner that there was the further matter of the folded paper that Sir Ranulph de Vere of de Vere Park near Cardigan had lodged at the Prerogative Court at Carmarthen on the Monday previous. Sir Ranulph set out a claim to a parole trust said to have been founded at the South Library of Wynne Court at the September of 1818, by which trust Sir Ranulph should take 1/2 of the real estate and 1/2 of the personal estate of the late Mrs. Wynne at her death. The substance of the claim Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen did not yet set out at Sarah's hand. He had not been at the South Library at the September of 1818, and could not vouch for the matter. The Wednesday following Sarah's arrival at Wynne Court, Sir Ranulph should call at the South Porch with his barrister Mr. Carew Tenby of Cardigan, and the matter should be heard out at the South Library at her own hand. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen begged Sarah to set the matter aside until then. Sarah drew the sealed personal letter to her hand and crossed to the south sash of the chambers. The Carmarthen light lay level upon the Cardiganshire crimson wax of the unbroken Wynne seal. She broke the seal and read Mrs. Honoria's hand at the careful Cardigan Bay copperplate of a 70-year hand. Mrs. Honoria had had Reverend Octavius's account of Sarah's shell cabinet work at every quarter-day since the year 1812, the 3 Tunbridge-bound cabinets of 47 Cardigan Bay species set in the Lady Day return of the present year. She had set her own 30-year Cardigan Bay shell cabinets at the South Library of Wynne for Sarah, by name at the 14th of October last, the day she signed the will. She had set the Turton and Montague correspondence bundle of 1789 to 1819 at the South Library writing table beside the cabinets. Her settled wish was that the British Coast Conchology should continue at the South Library. The Parish School Commission for St. Mary's had stood in the standing wish at the Lady Day return, and the village girls of the parish should have a shell class at the South Library at the Saturday afternoon at Sarah's settled hand, if Sarah should be willing. Sarah folded the personal letter at the south sash. She set it beside the will and the bank draft and the brass ring of keys and the calling card. The Cardiganshire crimson wax of the broken Wynne seal lay at the cream linen of the wrapper at her hand. The careful Cardigan Bay copperplate of Mrs. Honoria's 70-year hand stood at the inner page beside the careful even hand of the late Reverend Octavius's account of the shell cabinet work. Sarah had not known Mrs. Honoria had had the account of her work at every quarter-day since the year 1812. She had not known the Turton and Montague correspondence bundle at the South Library writing table at Wynne was at her own name. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen waited at the chamber's writing table at his clerk's even hand. Sarah thanked him at the level Cardigan Bay manor. She would set out at Aberystwyth at the Tuesday following the present Tuesday, the 30th of November, and come down to Wynne Court by the Carmarthen post-chaise. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen bowed at the south sash, said he should send the note over by the Tuesday post, and saw her down to the chambers door at Key Street. The Carmarthen post-chaise drew out at the upper close and took Sarah the 40 miles north at the level grey of the Cardigan Bay afternoon. She came back to the Aberystwyth parsonage at the dusk of the same Tuesday with the 5 items at the small leather satchel at her hand. She packed at the parsonage from the Wednesday morning through the Saturday evening at the even Aberystwyth pace she had learned at her father's hand. The shell cabinet went first into the cream linen at the wooden chest with the brass corners. She wrapped the 3 Tunbridge-bound shelves at 1 cream linen and laid them at the bottom of the chest. She wrapped the queen scallop and the common cockle and the dog whelk and the dog cockle and the banded wedge shell and the dog periwinkle and the painted top shell and the common limpet and the common mussel and the oyster and the razor shell and the sand gaper and the otter shell one at a time in tissue, and laid them at the velvet trays beside the shelves. She set the small brass caliper at the cream linen above the shells. She set the green calf conchology journal at the cream linen above the caliper, and she set Mr. Turton's conchological dictionary and Mr. Montague's Testacea Britannica above the journal at 2 cream linens, with her Turton of Swansea correspondence bundle 1815 to 1819 above the books. Above the conchology matter, she set her father's Greek Testament wrapped in a 2nd cream linen, her mother's prayer book at the side, and the small octavo Cardigan Bay Coast School volume of the late Reverend Octavius's notes that she had kept at the back parlour writing desk since his death at the spring of 1817. Her personal effects went into the small leather trunk her father had given her at her 21st year. The plain morning gabardines, the cream lawn underthings, the dark Cardiganshire wool shawl, the half-mourning grey muslin she would not yet wear, the plain dark caps. The heavier furniture would stand at the parsonage at Mrs. Tregarren's hand and not go down to Wynne. The lighter she would carry by the Tuesday post-chaise. The Saturday of the 27th of November came over the Cardigan Bay in the soft pale grey of the month. Sarah was at the back parlour writing desk when Mrs. Tregarren came up to say that the Reverend Pencareg of the Aberystwyth curacy had called at the south door. He was the curate the chapter had appointed after the Reverend Octavius's death, and Sarah had known him since the Lent of 1817. She received him in the south parlour. He took his parish leave with a sensible Aberystwyth bow and a settled blessing at the parsonage door. Sarah saw him out, came back to the south parlour, and closed the lid of the wooden chest at the back parlour table for the journey of the Tuesday morning following. The Sunday of the 28th and the Monday of the 29th, she kept at the parsonage at the careful settled manner she had set herself, the parsonage in its settled order, the trunks at the south porch corridor against the Tuesday morning. The Reverend Pencareg preached at St. Michael's at the morning office of the 3rd Sunday of Advent, and Sarah came back to the parsonage at the level Cardigan Bay dusk. The Tuesday morning of the 30th of November dawned at the soft, pale grey of an early Welsh winter. The post-chaise that Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen had sent up from Carmarthen stood at the south door of the parsonage. Sarah came down in her plain, dark morning gabardine and her dark Cardiganshire wool shawl with the green calf conchology journal at her hand and the plain, dark morning cap at her hair. She saw the trunk set into the chaise, the small leather trunk first, the wooden chest with the cream linen-wrapped shell cabinet at its bottom second, the 3rd trunk with the writing desk last. And she gave Mrs. Tregarren the parsonage keys and the cook's quarter-day wage, and the careful, settled instructions she had set out at the back parlour the evening before. Sarah took her seat in the chaise, and the chaise drew out at the parsonage south door and turned south by the lower side of the close toward the Cardigan Bay coast road. The Tafy ran high under the Aberavon Bridge at the noon stage. The chaise crossed the bridge and took the level Cardigan Bay coast road south. On the soft, pale grey Cardiganshire Tuesday morning of the 30th of November in the year 1819, 7 days after Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen, the Carmarthen solicitor, had set out at his Key Street chambers the warm-settled provisions of the last will and testament of the late Mrs. Honoria Mary Wynne of Wynne Court in the parish of Wynne by the Teifi, in the county of Cardigan, the small hired post-chaise of Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen drew up at the soft south wicket of the St. Michael's parsonage at Aberystwyth to convey Miss Sarah Wynne, the 18 miles southwest, into the Cardiganshire coast, and Sarah in unrelieved black mourning gabardine for her late great-aunt, the testatrix, with her plain dark mourning cap at the soft dark hair, plaited at the nape, and the 3 completed Tunbridge-bound shell cabinets of 1815 to 1819, wrapped in cream linen at the careful right hand of her plain travelling case, and the small brass ring of 6 Wynne house keys at her plain reticule, and the small folded covering letter of Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at her plain pocket-book, and the small green-calf conchology journal of Cardigan Bay species, wrapped first in clean cream linen at the inner safe corner of the case, stepped up into the chaise with the gentle Cardiganshire gravity of the Aberystwyth parsonage her late father, the Reverend Octavius Wynne, had kept at the curacy of St. Michael's of Aberystwyth all his days, and the chaise rolled gently out of the parsonage gate along the South Cardigan Bay Road at the soft pale grey light of late November, past the small Cardiganshire slate and lime-washed cottages of the Aberystwyth parish, and past the gentle salt pasture of the Ystwyth mouth, where the November sheep stood quiet at the low cliff edge above the bay, and at the 9th mile drew up briefly at the small Cardiganshire wayside inn, the Dolphin at Aberavon, kept by Mr. and Mrs. Aberavon Penmaen. These 19 years passed for the postboy to water the pair, and for Miss Wynne to take a small plain Cardiganshire parsonage tea at the small north parlour window, where Sarah at the gentle north parlour sash window took the small plain cup at the gentle quiet of the cool Cardiganshire morning, and looked west along the Cardigan Bay Road toward the soft grey sweep of the open bay at the far horizon, where the small fishing luggers of Aberavon rode at anchor at the rim of the winter water. And at the gentle close of the brief halt, the chaise rolled on the further 9 miles southwest through the small Cardiganshire village of Lennon, and along the gentle cliff-top above the bay, past the small parish of Lunristad, and at the bend of the Cardigan Lane, drew up at last at the south porch of Wynne Court in the soft, pale grey, late Cardiganshire afternoon light. The south porch of Wynne Court stood under the plain stone-mullioned south windows of the Cardiganshire slate and lime-wash manor of the year 1745, 2 stories of pale lime-wash over the local stone, with the soft slate roof at the gentle Cardiganshire pitch, and the 3 stone chimneys at the level Cardiganshire ridge, and on the worn stone step of the south porch, Mr. Aberporth, the butler of 21 years' service, stood in plain black tailcoat at the plain linen at the throat, 8 and 50, brass house keys at the hip, and Mr. Aberporth inclined gravely in the level Cardiganshire butler's manner, and said in the settled Cardiganshire fashion that the house of Wynne Court stood at Miss Wynne's warm wish. Behind him in the cool flagged south hall stood Mrs. Gwynfryn, the housekeeper of 17 years' service, in plain plum bombazine, with the small lace cap at the level Cardiganshire fashion, and the small brass household keys at her plain housekeeper's chatelaine, 6 and 50. Plum bombazine at the lace cap, and Mrs. Gwynfryn curtsied at the settled Cardiganshire housekeeper's fashion, and said in the soft Cardiganshire manner that the small south chamber of the late Mrs. Honoria had been aired these 5 days past for Miss Wynne's coming. At Mrs. Gwynfrin's right hand stood Mr. Penmaen Coast, the steward of 19 years' service, 60 weathered Cardigan coast complexion, plain dark coat, with the small steward's daybook at the right pocket, and Mr. Penmaen Coast bowed in the level Cardiganshire steward's manner and said in the plain Cardiganshire fashion that the home pasture and the walled south garden and the apple orchard stood at Miss Wynne's settled wish. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen, who had ridden over from Carmarthen by the shorter Cardigan road to meet the chaise at the south porch, produced from his plain dark wool pocket-book the folded inventory at the green ribbon at the South Hall writing table beside the brass standish, and the inventory of the Wynne estate, of the late Mrs. Honoria Mary Wynne widow, of the late Sir Augustus Wynne, 3rd Baronet, and lately of Wynne Court, set out at the careful italic of Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's clerk, Mr. Glyndwr Cardigan, comprised the home pasture of 152 acres of the cliff-top sheepwalk above Cardigan Bay, and the walled south garden of half an acre, with the small shell grotto at the south wall, at the late Mrs. Honoria's standing wish, and the apple orchard of the small Cardiganshire coast apples at the east, the south library at the lower floor of the manor of 376 volumes, principally devotional and conchological, at the plain Cardiganshire calf shelves of the late Sir Augustus's gentle settled gathering, the Wynne family plate of 78 pieces marked Carmarthen 1788 by the Carmarthen plate maker Mr. Carmarthen Price at the small plate room at the south kitchen passage, and the further sum of £3,300 in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England, standing in the late Mrs. Honoria's name at the testatrix's death. These comprised the whole of the real and personal estate at the south porch of Wynne Court at the soft, pale grey Cardiganshire afternoon of the 30th of November. From the gentle Cardiganshire cliff-top at the south sash of the lower floor, the broad sweep of Cardigan Bay lay below at the soft November fall of the cliff, in the long pale grey water of the late November sea, and the mid-distant silver mouth of the river Tafy opened gentle southwest at the estuary 3 miles below the manor, where the small fishing luggers of Cardigan stood at anchor at the slack water above the bar, and beyond the gentle Cardiganshire pasture, to the south, the soft slate-roofed lime-wash front of Wynne Court rose at the soft horizon under the pale grey, late November Cardiganshire sky, the small pale gulls turning at the soft wind off the bay above the gentle home pasture, and at the gentle south turn of the slope, the small slate roofs of the Wynne by the Tafy village lay below at the lane in the warm Cardiganshire limewash, white, and the small Cardiganshire stone tower of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy, rising plain and square at the village centre beside the gentle Cardiganshire estuary lane. Sarah, in unrelieved black morning gabardine, walked at Mrs. Gwynfrin's quiet right hand at the gentle late November afternoon light along the cool flagged south hall to the south library at the lower floor, and at the plain writing table at the south window of the south library she found set out in the careful settled fashion of the late great-aunt the 7 shallow mahogany shell cabinets of the late Mrs. Honoria's 28 years Cardiganshire conchology of 1789 to 1819, with the small velvet trays at the gentle slide of the careful Cardiganshire fashion, and the 387 catalogued British coast specimens lying gentle at the trays at the late great-aunt's settled hand. The small Cardigan Bay, queen scallop at the upper tray, the common cockle, and the dog whelk, and the dog cockle, and the banded wedge shell at the second tray, the dog periwinkle and the painted top shell, and the common limpet at the third, the common mussel and the oyster at the fourth, the razor shell and the sandgaper, and the otter shell at the 5th. And beside the 7 mahogany cabinets at the plain South Library writing table, the small worn green calf shell cabinet ledger of 1789 to 1819 in the patient-settled Cardiganshire hand of the late Mrs. Honoria, opened at the careful right hand at the last entry of the soft October of 1819, and at the right hand of the green calf ledger, the small linen-tied correspondence bundle of Mr. William Turton of Swansea and Mr. George Montague of South Molton, 11 settled letters of Mr. Turton at the Conchological Dictionary Commission of 1815 to 1819, and 7 settled letters of the late Mr. Montague at the Standing Testacea Britannica Correspondence of 1801 to 1810. Laid gentle at the small linen tape at the plain writing table at the south window above the bay. At the soft fall of the early Cardiganshire evening, Mrs. Gwynfryn brought up at the small plain Cardiganshire salver the small worn brown calf commonplace book of the late Mrs. Honoria Wynne of the 30 years settled Cardiganshire shell reading at the patient parsonage hand from the first page at the spring of 1789, at the late Sir Augustus's wedding gift to her, at the last page at the cool November of 1819 6 days before the testatrix's death, and laid the small brown calf commonplace book gentle on the plain South Library writing table at Miss Wynne's settled right hand beside the green calf shell cabinet ledger and the linen-tied Turton Montague correspondence bundle. Sarah, in the level Cardiganshire composure, took up the small brown calf commonplace book at the gentle quiet of the early winter evening, and read the patient-settled hand of her late great-aunt at the first page of the spring of 1789. The small, careful conchology primer extract at the late Mrs. Honoria's first reading of Mr. Pennant's plain instruction letter at the south parlour of Wynne Court, and laid the small brown calf commonplace book gentle at the right hand of the green calf shell cabinet ledger at the plain South Library writing table, and the small coal fire at the South Library grate burned quiet at the gentle settled Cardiganshire fashion at the soft fall of the early winter light. Mrs. Gwynfryn at the doorway of the South Library inclined gravely in the plum bombazine manner, and said in the soft Cardiganshire fashion that the small south chamber of the late Mrs. Honoria stood ready at Miss Wynne's settled wish, and Sarah at the South Library writing table acquiesced at the gentle Cardiganshire fashion her late father had kept at the curacy of St. Michael's of Aberystwyth. On the soft Cardiganshire Wednesday morning of the 1st of December, Sarah, in unrelieved black mourning gabardine, walked at Mrs. Gwynfryn's quiet right hand the small round of the south kitchen wall and the walled south garden of half an acre, with the small shell grotto at the south wall, at the late great-aunt's standing wish, and the apple orchard of the small Cardiganshire coast, apples at the gentle fall of the soft December cliff-top, and at the apple orchard, Mr. Penmaen Coast, at her right hand, pointed out in the patient Cardiganshire steward's fashion the settled rows of the late Sir Augustus's apple trees at the walled east corner, and the thin grey willow at the south wall of the orchard above the bay, and named the small Cardiganshire tenants of the Wynne estate, Mr. Abereron Price, at the western cliff-top pasture cottage, and Mr. Typhy Glindwer, at the eastern lower meadow cottage, and Mr. Aberporth Wynne, at the village forge at Wynne by the Tayfee, and said in the patient Cardiganshire steward's manner that each tenant had stood at the small rent-roll of the late Mrs. Honoria, at the Lady Day quarter, and the Michaelmas quarter for the 4 years past at the late great-aunt's settled wish. On the soft Cardiganshire Wednesday afternoon, Sarah at the South Library writing table opened the green calf shell cabinet ledger of 1789 to 1819 at the careful right hand of the soft afternoon light, and worked patient through the gentle settled bibliography of the late great-aunt's 387 British coast specimens, the small entry of the soft May of 1789 for the first Cardigan Bay queen scallop gathered at the Aberystwyth Pierfoot Rocks at the Tidor, late great-aunt's first conchological hand, the small entry of the soft June of 1793 for the dog whelk gathered at the Lennon cliff foot, the small entry of the soft August of 1798 for the painted topshell gathered at the Lanristad rock pool, the small entry of the soft September of 1812 for the ottershell gathered at the Tafy estuary bar, and at last the soft entry of the soft October of 1819 for the second Cardigan Bay queen scallop gathered at the Aberystwyth Pierfoot Rocks at the late great-aunt's settled close, 387 British coast specimens over the 30 settled years at the patient Cardiganshire hand, every entry at a Cardiganshire or Pembrokeshire or Carmarthenshire coast at the Bristol Channel and the Irish Sea, and not one entry at any tropical specimen at any Indo-Pacific water at any year. And made small notes at the plain octavo field book she had brought from the Aberystwyth parsonage. At the gentle quiet of the South Library, Sarah laid the green calf shell cabinet ledger flat at the right hand of the linen-tied Turton Montague correspondence bundle at the south window above the bay. On the soft Cardiganshire Thursday morning of the 2nd of December, Mrs. Gwynfryn brought up at the small Cardiganshire salver the parsonage tea at the gentle settled fashion, and laid the cup at the right hand of the South Library writing table beside the green calf ledger and the Turton Montague correspondence bundle. And Sarah, at the gentle Cardiganshire composure, took the cup at the quiet of the South Library, and looked at the south sash above the bay where the silver mouth of the Tafy opened gentle southwest toward the small parish of Cardigan at the bar. On the soft Cardiganshire. Friday morning of the 3rd of December, Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen rode over from Carmarthen by the Cardigan Road, and sat with Miss Wynne at the soft South Library, and read at the plain gold-rimmed spectacles in the patient Carmarthen solicitor's fashion the careful hand of her late great-aunt at the green calf shell cabinet ledger, and said in the plain Cardiganshire manner that the ledger stood at the settled fashion of the late Mrs. Honoria's Cardiganshire wish, beside the 7 mahogany shell cabinets and the linen-tied correspondence bundle of Mr. Turton at Swansea and the late Mr. Montague at South Molton. On the soft Cardiganshire Saturday afternoon of the 4th of December, the 5th day of Sarah's residence at Wynne Court, a small plain post-chaise drew up at the south porch, and a thin plain Cardiganshire clerk in plain charcoal wool with the plain leather folded pocket-book at the right hand stepped down at the south step and presented at Mr. Aberporth's small folded receiving tray a single plain Cardigan-printed calling card of cream pasteboard at the plain copper-plate engraving, Sir Ranulph de Vere, 4th Baronet, de Vere Park, near Cardigan, together with a small folded note in plain charcoal ink at the plain Cardiganshire hand of Sir Ranulph's clerk, and the clerk, Mr. Carew Tenby, thin grey, plain charcoal wool, said in the plain Cardiganshire clerk's manner that he stood at his master's instruction to leave at the south door of Wynne Court the preliminary calling card and the folded note announcing that Sir Ranulph de Vere, of de Vere Park, near Cardigan, desired the favour of a private interview with Miss Wynne at the South Library of Wynne Court on the Wednesday following at Sir Ranulph's settled convenience. Mr. Aberporth received the card and the folded note at the small folded receiving tray in the level Cardiganshire butler's fashion, and bowed gravely and carried them up the cool flagged South Hall to the South Library, where Sarah sat at the plain South Library writing table with the green calf shell cabinet ledger of the late Mrs. Honoria, opened at the soft October Cardigan Bay, Queen Scallop entry at the gentle quiet of the soft afternoon, and Mr. Aberporth presented the small folded receiving tray at her plain right hand in the level Cardiganshire butler's manner. Sarah, in the level Cardiganshire composure, took up the plain cream pasteboard calling card and read the plain copperplate engraving in the level Cardiganshire fashion, and laid the card flat on the writing table beside the green calf ledger, then took up the small folded charcoal ink note and read the plain Cardiganshire hand of Sir Ranulph's clerk, and laid the note flat at the right hand of the card, and said in the plain, even Cardiganshire fashion to Mr. Aberporth that the matter should be forwarded at the evening post to Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at Key Street for his settled counsel. Mr. Aberporth inclined gravely in the level Cardiganshire butler's manner and withdrew, and Sarah took up the plain quill and a clean sheet of plain Cardiganshire, laid paper, and wrote at the level Cardiganshire hand a small folded covering note to Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at Key Street, enclosing the calling card of Sir Ranulph de Vere, and the folded charcoal ink note of Mr. Carew Tenby, and stating that she should be glad of his settled counsel before the Wednesday following, and sealed the folded packet in plain Wynne crimson wax, with the small plain Wynne signet at her late father's gentle settled fashion, and laid the packet on the small South Hall salver for the evening Cardiganshire post-boy, who at the gentle close of the soft November afternoon took it up at the south porch and rode south the 40 miles to Carmarthen at the level Cardiganshire pace. On the soft Cardiganshire Sunday morning of the 5th of December, the first Sunday of Sarah's residence at Wynne Court, and the second Sunday of Advent in the parish of Wynne by the Teifi, Sarah, in unrelieved black mourning gabardine, walked at Mrs. Gwynfrin's quiet right hand the small quarter-mile down the soft Cardiganshire estuary lane from the south porch of Wynne Court to the small Cardiganshire stone tower of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Teifi at the village centre, and sat in the plain Wynne south pew at the second bay from the chancel in the level Cardiganshire. Wynne fashion her late great-aunt had kept the 30 years of her Cardiganshire residence, and Reverend Price Aaron of 49 years in plain black gown at the small Cardiganshire stone pulpit preached the Advent 2 sermon at the gentle Cardiganshire text of the prophet Isaiah at the 11th chapter, and a little child shall lead them, in the patient settled Cardiganshire pastoral fashion he had kept at the cure of Wynne by the Teifi these 11 years past, and Sarah at the gentle Cardiganshire composure heard the Advent sermon at the second bay from the chancel, and, at the gentle close of the service, walked back at Mrs. Gwynfrin's quiet right hand the small quarter-mile up the soft Cardiganshire estuary lane to the south porch of Wynne Court in the soft pale grey, December Cardiganshire light. Wednesday, December 8th, 1819 came in cold and clear at Wynne Court, with the south wind off Cardigan Bay, carrying the faint salt tang Sarah had grown up with at the Aberystwyth pier foot, and the sea below the cliff-top pasture, lying smooth and grey as planed slate under a pale Advent sky. She had risen early at the south landing, dressed in the unrelieved black mourning gabardine she had worn since the express had come down the Friday before, and gone directly to the South Library, that long, low, stone-mullioned room at the southwest corner of the manor, where Mrs. Honoria Wynne had kept her cabinets and her writing table and her commission bundle from Mr. Turton at Swansea, and where, since the previous Saturday, Sarah had been quietly setting in order the conchological work of 30 years. She had reason to set in order more than usual that morning. Sir Ranulph de Vere of de Vere Park, near Cardigan, 4th Baronet, second cousin to the late Sir Augustus Wynne by a Price great-grandmother and the gentleman whose calling card had been left at the south porch on the previous Saturday, was expected at the South Library that morning with Mr. Carew Tenby, his barrister, the matter, by Sir Ranulph's own note in a hot copper plate, being a parole trust touching the disposition of Wynne Court, of which the late Mrs. Wynne had spoken to him in private interview the preceding September, and of which Miss Wynne would no doubt wish to learn the full particulars at the earliest convenient hour. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen had ridden up from Key Street the evening before, in his plain dark wool and his gold spectacles, and was now seated at the writing-table at the south window, his portfolio open, the inkstand at his right hand, his calm Carmarthen face entirely without expression, as he turned the pages of Mrs. Honoria's shell cabinet ledger. He had said only on arriving at the south porch in the dusk, "Miss Wynne, I have read Sir Ranulph's note. A parole trust at law requires very particular proof. I shall be present at the South Library throughout. You will, I think, wish to have your own materials at hand." She had said only, "I shall, Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen. They are at hand." And she had set them at hand. The South Library was warmed by a small fire of Cardiganshire coal in the limestone hearth at the west wall, and lit by the cool grey south light off the bay through the 3 tall stone-mullioned windows. At the long writing-table along the south window, Sarah had laid out, in the order she would want them, the 3 principal materials of her great-aunt's conchological work. At the left lay Mrs. Honoria Wynne's shell cabinet ledger, a folio bound in calf the colour of the taffy at autumn, kept in Mrs. Honoria's own clear copper plate from the first entry of April 4th, 1789, a common cockle, Carastoderma edule, gathered at Cardigan Strand, to the last entry of October 7th, 1819, a banded wedge shell, Donax, October 1819, a banded wedge shell, Donax vittatus, gathered at Aberporth, 387 catalogued specimens in all, each with the species in Linnaean Latin, the English name, the Cardiganshire locality of collection, and the date. Sarah had counted the entries the previous Saturday at the South Library by candlelight. She had counted them again the Monday morning by daylight. She had read every species line through twice. There was not, at any page or at any year, a mitra. At the centre of the writing-table lay Mr. George Montagu's Testacea Britannica, or Natural History of British Shells, Marine, Land and Fresh Water, the Romsey Quarto of 1803, Sarah's own copy, brought down with her from the Aberystwyth parsonage at the end of November. Much thumbed at the margins, the slips of her own paper, marking the Queen Scallop page, the Dog-Whelk page, and the page at which Mr. Montagu sets out the geographical limits of the British coastal molluscan fauna. The slip at the last of these pages was the one she had set in the Monday afternoon. She had read the geographical limits passage through 3 times. At the right of the writing-table lay a calf portfolio tied with a black tape, containing the standing correspondence between Mrs. Honoria Wynne and Mr. William Turton, surgeon and conchologist at Swansea, on the commission of materials for the Conchological Dictionary of the British Islands, which Mr. Turton had published at London in the present year. The portfolio held some 40 letters from 1815 forward. The letter Sarah had set uppermost, the long blue-laid sheet folded once, with Mr. Turton's neat Swansea hand at the address and his small wafer seal in black at the fold, was dated May 14th, 1819, and was addressed to Mrs. Wynne at Wynne Court. Sarah had brought this letter down from her own keeping at the Aberystwyth parsonage, where it had lain in her father's old correspondence press since Mrs. Honoria had sent a fair copy on for Sarah's instruction in the summer. Beside the 3 principal materials, Sarah had set her own green-calf conchology journal, in which she had written the previous evening, in her plain, steady hand, the short memorandum she meant to read into the matter if it should fall to her to speak, every word of which she had considered through. A little before the half-hour, Mrs. Gwynfryn, the housekeeper, in her lace cap and plum bombazine, came in at the south library door to say in her soft Cardiganshire voice that the Cardigan chaise was at the south sweep, and Sir Ranulph de Vere and the gentleman with him were stepping down. Sarah said, "Thank you, Mrs. Gwynfryn. Show the gentleman to the south library. Mr. Aberporth may bring up the coffee at a quiet hour." Mrs. Gwynfryn dropped her short curtsy and withdrew. Sir Ranulph de Vere, 56, stout 5 feet 10, gout-flushed, primrose silk waistcoat, oily smile, came in at the south library door at the next quiet moment, leaning a little on a malacca stick, his neckcloth a shade too high, his greatcoat shrugged off into Mr. Aberporth's hands at the threshold. Mr. Carew Tenby followed at a half-pace behind, thin grey man in charcoal wool, a black portfolio under his left arm, sharp, Welsh-bordering eyes that took the South Library in at one slow sweep. Sir Ranulph bowed to Sarah with a stiff courtesy that did not quite reach his eyes. "Miss Wynne, Cousin Sarah, if you will allow the familiar. I trust I see you in tolerable health, considering the heavy bereavement of last month. May I present Mr. Carew Tenby of Lincoln's Inn, who has the goodness to attend me in this small private matter?" Sarah said only, "Sir Ranulph, Mr. Carew Tenby, pray be seated. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen of Carmarthen, my late great-aunt's man of business, is present, as is the custom in such matters." Sir Ranulph's smile tightened by a perceptible degree at the sight of the gold spectacles at the writing-table, but he sat in the wing-chair at the hearth without comment, and Mr. Carew Tenby took the chair at his right. For a moment there was no sound at the South Library, but the small, soft fall of a Cardiganshire coal at the hearth, and the faint, distant break of a low bay-swell at the foot of the south cliff-top. Then Sir Ranulph cleared his throat and began. "Cousin Sarah, the matter is a small one, and I shall not weary you. My late cousin, Mrs. Honoria Wynne, in the September of last year, the September of 1818, that is, was kind enough to receive me at this very South Library on a private interview of some hours. The day was the 14th of September, a Monday, as I recollect, a cool autumn afternoon, the South Bay quite still through these very windows. The substance of our interview was a settled intention, which she expressed to me with the greatest clearness, of declaring a parole trust upon the Wynne Court estate, the said estate at her decease, to descend to me and my heirs at De Vere Park, subject to the modest charge of an annuity of £200 to such female cousin as she might in her latter discretion select. The matter was discussed, Cousin Sarah, throughout the afternoon, in the most explicit terms, and I am here today, with the kindly assistance of Mr. Carew Tenby, to acquaint you of the trust, and to invite your assent to the orderly conveyance of the estate at Lady Day next." He paused, and his oily smile widened by a degree, and he laid his ringed hand upon the arm of the wing-chair. Mr. Carew Tenby opened his portfolio at his knee, with the small dry rustle of legal paper, and did not look up. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at the writing-table said calmly, without lifting his head, "Sir Ranulph, the assertion of a parole trust in respect of real property is a matter of considerable particularity at law. The Court of Chancery will require the strictest proof of the words spoken, of the circumstances, of the witnesses, if any, and of the corroboration. May I ask Sir Ranulph to set out the particular circumstances of the said interview of the 14th of September, that the proof may be of record?" "With pleasure, sir. With the greatest pleasure." Sir Ranulph turned a little in the wing-chair, drew a long breath, and began the recitation he had plainly committed to careful memory. "I arrived at Wynne Court in the middle of the said Monday, the 14th of September 1818, in my own travelling chaise, by way of the Cardigan Road. My cousin Mrs. Wynne received me at this South Library at the early afternoon. The afternoon was cool, a south wind off the bay, a clear sky, the south light through these very stone-mullioned windows, quite a remarkable cool grey. I sat in this very chair at the hearth. Mrs. Wynne stood at her writing table at the south window. Throughout the interview, which extended some 3 hours, my cousin was occupied at the cataloguing of a particular specimen of which she was, at that moment, taking the small particulars into her ledger. A fine shell of which she had lately come into possession, of which she was much pleased, and the matter of the parole trust was discussed, sir, throughout, in the most explicit and connected terms. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen turned a page at the portfolio at his right hand, and said evenly, "Sir Ranulph, the court will, I think, wish to know the particular specimen at which Mrs. Wynne was occupied throughout the said interview. Such particularity, as Sir Ranulph will appreciate, lends materially to the credit of the recollection." Sir Ranulph permitted himself a small satisfied nod. "I had thought so, sir. The specimen, Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen, is one I shall not forget. It was a mitra, the mitre shell, sir, of the Linnaean nomenclature of 1758. A most striking conical shell, white with deep red markings at the spiral whorls, of some 4 inches length, very handsome upon the velvet cabinet tray. My cousin had it open at the small brass caliper at this very writing table. She was, as she informed me at the entry of the room, occupied in measuring it for her ledger, the specimen having been lately gathered at Cardigan Bay, at, as I recollect her saying, the Mewent strand below the cliff, where she had walked at the early September low tide. She remarked, sir, that it was a fine instance of the species, and a most welcome addition to her Cardigan Bay cabinet. She was, in short, cataloguing the mitra throughout the interview at which the parole trust was discussed, and the cataloguing and the discussion are inseparable at my recollection." Mr. Carew Tenby, without lifting his eyes from his portfolio, made a small, precise note at his sheet. Sarah, who had been standing very still at the south end of the writing table with her hand at the green calf conchology journal, did not move at the naming of the species. Her face did not alter. The cool grey south light fell at her plain dark morning cap, and at the calm grey eyes the colour of the taffy at autumn, and she said nothing for the space of perhaps 5 quiet breaths. Then she stepped 1 pace forward to the writing table at the south window, set her hand upon the calf-bound ledger at the left of the table, and spoke in the gentle level voice she had used at the parish school at Aberystwyth. "Sir Ranulph, may I trouble you with 3 small particulars before I answer?" Sir Ranulph waved his ringed hand with an air of indulgent permission. "Cousin Sarah, by all means." She opened the ledger at the inserted black ribbon she had set there the Monday before, and turned it gently to the south light. "This is my late great-aunt's shell cabinet ledger, kept at her own hand from the first entry of the 4th of April 1789, a common cockle gathered at Cardigan Strand, to the last of the 7th of October last, a banded wedge shell gathered at Aberporth. There are 387 catalogued specimens in this book, every entry in Mrs. Wynne's own copperplate, every entry signed at the foot of the day by her own initial. I have counted the entries through twice, and have read every species line. There is, Sir Ranulph, at no page and at no year of this ledger, an entry for mitra. There is no entry for any mitre shell at any nomenclature. There is no entry for the 14th of September, 1818 of any kind. The entry preceding is for the 11th of September, a painted top shell gathered at New Quay, and the entry following is for the 20th of September, a dog cockle gathered at Aberporth. The shell you have named, sir, is not in the ledger." She lifted her hand from the page and let the south light fall on the open columns. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen turned a single page at his portfolio and made 1 quiet note. Sir Ranulph's gout flush deepened by a perceptible shade. he said with the first small fraying of his oily smile. Cousin Sarah, my late cousin, in the easy course of a long autumn afternoon, may well have neglected to enter at the day a specimen she meant to enter on the morrow. The fact of the Mitra at the South Library on the 14th of September, 1818, does not stand or fall by an entry in a ledger. I witnessed the shell, sir. I sat in this chair. I observed my cousin at her work for 3 hours together. The shell was there, Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen. The shell was there. Sarah did not answer this at once. She set her hand at the centre of the writing table on the worn brown cuff of Mr. Montague's Testacea Britannica and turned the volume to the slip she had set at the Monday afternoon. Sir Ranulph, the second particular. This is Mr. George Montague's Testacea Britannica, or Natural History of British Shells, the Romsey Quarto of 1803, the standing authority on the molluscan fauna of the British coasts. The slip at this page marks Mr. Montague's exposition of the geographical limits of the British shells. The Mitra of Linnaeus, 1758, is a tropical Indo-Pacific species. Sir Ranulph, the natural range of the Mitra shell is the coastal waters of Sri Lanka, of Indonesia, of the Philippines, and of the warm reefs of the eastern Indian Ocean. Mr. Montague does not enter the species in his catalogue of British shells at any page, because the species has at no year been recorded in British waters, neither at the south coast of England, nor at the west coast of Wales, nor at the Hebrides, nor at the Orkneys, nor at any British or Irish strand. The shell cannot be gathered at the Mouet strand of Cardigan Bay, because it cannot be observed at any British strand. It is not a British species, sir. It is not a Welsh species. It is not, by Mr. Montague's standing authority, a species that the early September low tide at Mewent could possibly have set within my late great-aunt's reach. Mr. Carew Tenby, at this, lifted his sharp grey eyes from his portfolio for the first time since the recitation, and looked at his client with the smallest, driest professional attention. Sarah turned a page of the Testacea Britannica and laid her finger gently at the line at the foot of the right column. Mr. Montague sets out the matter at this paragraph in his own words. The Mitra shells of the genus Mitra, he writes, are exclusively of warm tropical seas, and have never been gathered at any British or Irish coast within recorded memory, and the conchologist who shall produce an instance to the contrary will be doing a singular service to British science. Sir Ranulph, my late great-aunt, was a very serious conchologist. She would have known the Testacea Britannica at the column line. She did not enter a Mitra at her ledger, because the Mitra was not at Cardigan Bay to be gathered. Sir Ranulph's primrose silk waistcoat rose and fell at the wing-chair with a quicker breath. He opened his mouth and shut it again. He said, with a small dry laugh that did not quite carry, "Cousin Sarah, you speak with a great deal of confidence on a matter of natural science. The shell may have come to my cousin's hand by a private purchase from a Bristol merchant, a curiosity from the Indies, and she may have misdescribed it to me as Cardigan Bay, collected in the easy way of an autumn afternoon. The substance of the parole trust, sir, does not stand or fall by the provenance of a shell." Sarah said, in the same gentle level voice, "Sir Ranulph, the third particular." She set her hand at the right of the writing table at the calf portfolio, and lifted from the top of it the blue-laid sheet folded once, with the small black wafer seal at the fold. "This is the standing letter of Mr. William Turton, surgeon and conchologist of Swansea, to my late great-aunt at Wynne Court, dated the 14th of May, 1819, in the matter of the commission Mr. Turton had laid upon her for materials of the Conchological Dictionary of the British Islands, which he published at London at Michaelmas of this present year. I have brought the letter down from my father's correspondence press at the Aberystwyth parsonage at the end of November. The letter is in Mr. Turton's own hand, sealed at his Swansea wafer. She unfolded the sheet to the south light. Mr. Turton writes at the third paragraph, which I shall read in his own words. I remind my dear Mrs. Wynne that the standing scope of our commission is the coastal molluscan fauna of the British Islands, and that no specimen of foreign or tropical provenance, whether of West Indian, East Indian, or Mediterranean origin, is to be entered at the Conchological Dictionary under my hand. The mandate, dear madam, is British coast only, as we have determined at our standing correspondence from the autumn of 1815, and I should not wish, at this late stage of the press, to admit any material that falls outside that strict scope. Mr. Turton signs at the foot. Your obliged servant, William Turton, Swansea, May 14th, 1819. She refolded the letter at the same crease and set it gently at the south light at the writing table. Sir Ranulph, my late great-aunt's collection mandate at Mr. Turton's commission was British coast only, by Mr. Turton's own standing letter at this writing table. She did not enter tropical material at the Conchological Dictionary. She did not enter tropical material at her own ledger. She would not have catalogued a tropical specimen at her South Library at the afternoon of the 14th of September, 1818, because she had no occasion to catalogue tropical material at any afternoon of any month of any year of her commission. Mr. Turton's letter is dated the May before her decease, and is the standing instruction at her writing table at the present hour. She stepped back one quiet pace from the writing table, set her hand upon the green calf conchology journal at the south end, and looked at Sir Ranulph de Vere with the calm grey eyes, the colour of the Teifi at autumn. Sir Ranulph, Mitra is a tropical Indo-Pacific species. The mitre shell cannot have been gathered at Cardigan Bay because it has never been recorded in British waters at any year. Mrs. Wynne's collection mandate at the Turton Commission was British coast only by his standing letter at this writing table. The specimen you have named cannot have been at the South Library you set it out. For a long moment there was no sound at the South Library, but the fall of a coal at the hearth and the small, slow tick of the long case clock at the south landing beyond the door. The cool grey south light off the bay fell at the open ledger, at the open Testacea Britannica, at the unfolded blue-laid sheet of Mr. Turton's letter, and at the gout-flushed face of Sir Ranulph de Vere, of de Vere Park. Sir Ranulph's malacca stick slipped at his ringed hand and rang once against the limestone hearth. He did not retrieve it. The primrose silk waistcoat rose at a short, shallow breath, and the oily smile that had carried him into the South Library at the bow of the threshold was wholly gone from his stout, gout-flushed face. He looked at Mr. Carew Tenby at his right, with the small, mute appeal of a man whose carefully prepared paper has come apart at the seam. Mr. Carew Tenby did not return the look. He had closed his portfolio at his knee, with a small dry click, while Sarah was reading the Turton letter, and he sat now, with his thin grey hand at the calf cover, and his sharp, Welsh-bordering eyes upon the cool grey light at the south window. Sir Ranulph essayed one further attempt. He said, with a small breaking note at the back of his throat, "Cousin Sarah, the shell may have been misnamed at the day. I am not a conchologist. I may have misrecollected the species at the distance of 15 months. The substance of the parole trust, Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at the writing table lifted his gold spectacles a degree and spoke with the same even Carmarthen quiet he had used at the opening of the interview. Sir Ranulph, the substance of an alleged parole trust at law stands wholly upon the credit of the recollection. Sir Ranulph has set out at this South Library, at the present hour, a particular and circumstantial recollection. A Monday afternoon, a south wind, a cool grey light, a specimen of Mitra upon a velvet cabinet tray, a small brass caliper, a Mount strand, an early September low tide, 3 hours of discussion at the same writing table. The particularity, sir, was set out at Sir Ranulph's own choosing, as the credit of the recollection at the prerogative court would necessarily require. The particular specimen at the centre of the recollection cannot, by the standing authority of Mr. Montague, have been observed at any British strand at any year, cannot, by the standing letter of Mr. Turton, have entered Mrs. Wynne's collection at any clause of the commission under which she worked, and is not, by the standing ledger of Mrs. Wynne herself, entered at any page of any year. The particularity of the recollection has been weighed at the present hour, sir, and has not been found to stand. I shall be unable to attest the recollection to the prerogative court at Carmarthen at the Tuesday following reading. Mr. Carew Tenby coughed once into his thin grey fist. He stood up from his chair at Sir Ranulph's right, retrieved the malacca stick from where it had fallen at the limestone hearth, and laid it gently at his client's hand. He said, in a dry barrister's voice that gave nothing away, "Sir Ranulph, with Miss Wynne's permission, and Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's, I shall withdraw from the matter. I shall return to Lincoln's Inn at the Cardigan post. The papers prepared at my chambers will be returned to Sir Ranulph at De Vere Park by the Friday following carrier, and the small fee already advanced will be returned at the same hand. I bid Miss Wynne a good morning. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen, your servant." He bowed with a thin, precise civility to Sarah, who inclined her head, and to Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen, who lifted his gold spectacles a fraction in acknowledgment. Mr. Carew Tenby took up his portfolio under his left arm and crossed the south library to the door, and went out at the threshold without a backward look at Sir Ranulph de Vere. Sir Ranulph remained in the wing-chair at the hearth. The gout flush had drained from his face by a perceptible shade, leaving the stout features curiously slack and the primrose silk waistcoat ill-fitted at the chest. He looked at the open ledger at the south end of the writing table, and at the open Testacea Britannica at the centre, and at the unfolded blue-laid sheet of Mr. Turton's letter at the right, and then at the calm, dark figure of Sarah Wynne in her unrelieved black mourning gabardine at the south window, with the cool, grey bay-light behind her. And he said nothing at all for the space of perhaps 10 quiet breaths. Then he set his ringed hand at the arm of the wing-chair, and rose, with a small, awkward catch at the gout in his right knee, and made his stiff bow to Sarah at the south library. A bow that had nothing of the oily entry smile in it, and that he did not quite finish at the second. "Cousin Sarah, I bid you a good morning. I shall trouble you no further at Wynne Court," Sarah said, in the gentle level voice. "Sir Ranulph, good morning. Mr. Aberporth will see you to the south porch. The Cardigan chaise is at the south sweep." He did not answer. He turned at the wing-chair, took up the malacca stick at his ringed hand, and went out at the south library door at a stiff, slow pace, his gout very plain at the second step. Mr. Aberporth, the Wynne butler, in his plain black tailcoat, was at the threshold to take him to the south porch. The south library door fell to behind him at the soft Cardiganshire latch, the small fall of a coal at the limestone hearth, and the small, slow tick of the long case clock at the south landing were the only sounds in the room. Through the south window, the cool grey light off Cardigan Bay lay quite still at the open columns of the ledger, and at the British coast paragraphs of the Testacea Britannica, and at the Swansea hand of Mr. Turton's letter, and a single Welsh herring gull went over at the south cliff-top with a thin, sweet cry. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen of Key Street, Carmarthen, sat for some moments at the writing table without moving. Then he closed his portfolio at his right hand with a small, quiet click, set his gold spectacles a fraction higher at the bridge of his nose, and rose from his chair. He crossed the worn Turkey carpet to the south end of the writing table, where Sarah stood with her hand upon the green calf conchology journal, and made her his small grave Carmarthen bow. "Miss Wynne, the matter is settled. The shell has settled it." Sarah said only, "Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen, I thank you for your attendance at the South Library this morning. It was my office, Miss Wynne. It was no more than my office." He paused, and his calm Carmarthen face permitted itself the faintest possible softening at the corner of the mouth. "Your late great-aunt, Miss Wynne, kept the cleanest ledger in Cardiganshire. I had not, until this morning, fully understood that she had kept it for the present occasion, as well as for Mr. Turton's commission. I shall ride to Carmarthen at the South Porch within the short while, and I shall be at the Prerogative Court at the Tuesday following reading with the ledger and the Montague and the Turton letter at my portfolio, in case any further difficulty should be offered, which I do not now think it will be." Sarah said quietly, "Sir Ranulph will not return." "He will not, Miss Wynne. Mr. Carew Tenby has withdrawn at the South Library, and will not return either. Sir Ranulph would require fresh counsel to mount a fresh paper, and no counsel at the Western Circuit, Miss Wynne, will take up the parole trust against the ledger and the Montague and the Turton letter. The shell has settled it, as I have said." He turned, took up his hat and gloves and his portfolio at the writing table, and crossed the South Library to the door, where he made his second small Carmarthen bow at the threshold. "Miss Wynne, I shall do myself the honour of waiting upon you at the South Library on the Monday following, with the residuary account and the small papers of the steward and the home pasture. Until that hour, Miss Wynne, I bid you a good morning at Wynne Court." And he went out at the South Library door, and Mrs. Gwynfryn was at the threshold to see him to the South Porch, with his hat and his portfolio. Sarah did not move from the south end of the writing table for some little while. She stood with her hand upon the green calf conchology journal, and looked at the open ledger at the left and the open Testacia Britannica at the centre, and the unfolded blue-laid sheet of Mr. Turton's letter at the right, and through the south window at the cool grey Cardigan Bay below the cliff-top pasture, and she did not speak. The single Welsh herring gull at the south cliff-top had gone away towards the Teifi. The small fall of a coal at the limestone hearth had quieted to a low, steady glow. The cool grey south light off the bay fell across the worn Turkey carpet at her plain black morning gabardine, and at the soft, dark hair plaited at the nape beneath the plain, dark morning cap. After a while, she stepped one pace to the left and set her hand upon the calf cover of Mrs. Honoria's shell cabinet ledger, and turned it gently to the last entry. The banded wedge shell gathered at Aberporth on the 7th of October. She read the line through once at her great-aunt's clear copper plate, and laid her own hand flat upon the page for a moment, and then she closed the ledger at the small brown ribbon, and set it gently at the cabinet at the west wall, where Mrs. Honoria had always kept it. She set Mr. Montague's Testacea Britannica back upon the writing table at the centre, with the slip still at the geographical limits page, in case Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen should wish it at the Monday following. She folded Mr. Turton's letter at the same single crease, and tied it back into the calf portfolio at the right, and set the portfolio at the small Sheraton cabinet at the south window, where her great-aunt had kept the standing correspondence. She had not yet opened the green calf conchology journal at the south end of the writing table. She opened it now at the inserted black ribbon she had set there the previous evening, and took up the small steel pen from the inkstand at the writing table, and dipped it once at the inkwell, and wrote, in her own plain steady hand, at the foot of the page, "Wednesday, South Library, Wynne Court. Sir Ranulph de Vere of de Vere Park, near Cardigan, plus Mr. Carew Tenby of Lincoln's Inn attending at the said hour. The alleged parole trust of September 14, 1818, founded upon the alleged cataloguing of a Mitra asterisk of Cardigan Bay, the mitre shell of Linnaeus, 1758, being a tropical Indo-Pacific species at the standing authority of Mr. Montague's Testacea Britannica of 1803, plus Mrs. Honoria's ledger, 1789 to 1819 of 387 specimens, recording no Mitra at any page, plus Mr. Turton's standing letter at May 14th, 1819, recording the commission mandate at British coast only. The said paper falling at the South Library at the said hour. Mr. Carew Tenby withdrawing from the matter. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen attesting at the Tuesday following Carmarthen reading. She read the entry through once. She blotted it gently at the small brass pounce-pot at the writing table. She set the steel pen back at the inkstand and the cap at the inkwell, and closed the green calf conchology journal at the ribbon, and set it at the south end of the writing table where it had lain at the entry of the morning. Then she stood at the south window of the South Library at Wynne Court for some long moments, with the cool grey light off Cardigan Bay full at her plain black morning gabardine, and at her calm grey Tafy estuary eyes, and watched the slow south-running swell at the bay below the cliff-top pasture. She did not weep at the South Library. She did not laugh. She did not look at the door at which Sir Ranulph de Vere had gone out at the Malacca stick at the slow, stiff pace of his gout. She looked at the bay, where her late great-aunt had walked the Strand at Cardigan and at Memwent and at Aberporth and at New Quay every September of 30 years, and had brought back the cockles and the queen scallops and the dog whelks and the painted top shells and the banded wedge shells of the British coast, and had set them at the velvet cabinet trays of the South Library at Wynne Court, and had entered them at her clear copper plate at the calf-bound ledger, every one a British species, every one a Cardigan Bay shell, every one her own. And after a little while, Sarah Wynne turned from the south window of the South Library, and crossed the worn Turkey carpet to the small Sheraton cabinet at the west wall, and unlocked the velvet cabinet tray at which her great-aunt had kept the queen scallop of the second cabinet, and lifted out the cool small pink rose shell at her ungloved hand, and held it once gently at the cool grey south light off Cardigan Bay before setting it back at the velvet tray and locking the cabinet at the small brass key. The mid-December weather closed in soft and grey along the Cardigan Bay coast in the week following Sir Ranulph de Vere's collapse at the South Library, and Sarah Wynne, who had now to her grave Welsh astonishment been confirmed sole heiress of Wynne Court, settled into the slow, ordered rhythm of the house, with the same gentle gravity she had carried out of the Aberystwyth parsonage. The dog whelks at the south parlour cabinet were dusted each morning. The shell cabinet ledger was opened each forenoon at the South Library writing table. The household accounts were taken each Friday at Mrs. Gwynfrin's plain elm table in the housekeeper's room, behind the south servants' passage, with the brick hob warm at Sarah's right hand, and a clean cream-curd round of Welsh coast cheese set at the housekeeper's pewter platter for Sarah's nuncheon. The Cardigan Bay below the south cliff was visible at every south sash of the manor. Silver grey at the December dawn, slate grey at the December forenoon, ink black at the December dusk, and Sarah at her late great-aunt's South Library window let the steady washing of the bay on the cliff-foot rocks settle her into the place that had now by Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen's parchment become hers. She did not, at any forenoon in those first December weeks, unpack the trunk that held her mother's small lace collar and her father's plain silver-cased pocket Bible. The trunk stood quiet at the foot of the south chamber bed, and Sarah let it stand. She wrote a gentle line to Mrs. Tregarren at the Aberystwyth parsonage that she was well at Wynne, and that the south parlour shell cabinet of the Aberystwyth house should be packed at the Cardigan Bay carrier's wagon at the Tuesday following and brought up to Wynne for the South Library. She wrote a longer line to Mr. William Turton at Swansea that she had now at her hand Mrs. Honoria Wynne's ledger of 387 catalogued Cardigan Bay specimens, and that the British Coast collection mandate should continue at the South Library at Wynne so long as her hand was able to lift a brass caliper at the Pier Foot Rocks. She wrote a short line to Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen that the £3, 300 in the 3%, should remain at the consols at Carmarthen, and that the home pasture rents should be taken at Lady Day at the steward's accustomed hand. She wrote a Cardiganshire Express to Mr. Aberporth's brother, the carrier at Abereron, that the small Aberystwyth parsonage furniture should be brought up at the South Carrier's wagon at the Friday following for the South Chamber. The 4 letters were sealed at the South Library writing table with a small plain wafer seal of plain Cardigan Bay green wax, and laid at the Aberystwyth post bag at the South Hall console table for the Tuesday following post boy. January came in cold and clear above the Cardigan Bay, and Sarah at the South Library settled to the ledger work in earnest. She opened Mrs. Honoria's green leather ledger of 1789 to 1819, took the brass caliper to her right hand and the small steel nib to her left, and she catalogued at her own gentle italic the 387 specimens of the South Library cabinets against the late lady's hand of 30 years past. She found at her work that her late great-aunt had indeed gathered her first Wynne Court specimen, a common cockle, Cerastoderma edule, at the Pier Foot Rocks at the spring tide of 14 May 1789, the second year of her widowhood at Wynne, and the last specimen, a common periwinkle, Littorina littorea, at the South Tafy estuary on Saturday, November the 6th, 1819, 6 days before her death at the South Chamber on Friday, November 12th. The Cardigan Bay collection mandate had not lapsed at any year of those 30. The cabinets at the South Library were 3 plain Welsh oak presses of 7 drawers each, the drawers lined in plain cream linen and divided at small partitions of plain Welsh pine for the small specimens. Sarah went through them drawer by drawer at the gentle, steady cataloguing rate of 3 drawers in the forenoon and 2 in the afternoon, naming each shell at the brass tag at her late great-aunt's hand against the green leather ledger and against the open page of Mr. Montague's 1803 Testacea Britannica at her left elbow. Mr. Turton's standing letter of May 14th, 1819, was kept at the green leather correspondence bundle in the bottom drawer of the Welsh oak writing table for ready reference at the British Coast collection mandate, and the small Welsh Coast quill of plain grey goosefeather was kept at the small bone inkstand of plain Cardigan Bay design at the right corner of the writing table. Miss Glenys Gwynfryn, the housekeeper's niece of 24 at the South Parsonage cottage of Wynne by the Tafy, was settled at Mrs. Gwynfryn's gentle Welsh recommendation as reading companion at the South Library from the 2nd week of January at 3 afternoons in the week. Miss Gwynfryn was a small, soft Welsh Coast girl of plain dark Cardiganshire hair and plain grey Welsh Coast eyes, in plain dark grey wool of the South Parsonage cottage, gentle at the South Library reading chair, and gentle at the brass dog grate of the South Library hearth. She read at the South Library afternoon, reading from Mr. Cowper's Task in the South Parsonage edition, and from the South Parlour copy of Miss Burney's Evelina of 1778, lately come down at the carrier's wagon from the Aberystwyth Parsonage South Bookshelf, and from the small green-board copy of Mr. Gilpin's Observations on the Wye of 1782, set at the South Library, small reading shelf for the Welsh Coast tourist season at the South Country, Sarah at the brass caliper at the South Library writing table, kept at her steady forenoon work, whilst Miss Gwynfryn read gentle at the south reading chair, and the small, ordered Welsh coast afternoons at the South Library settled deeper into the rhythm of the late lady's hand at the cataloguing. In the third week of January, with the bay grey and the South Library hearth warm at the brass dog grate, Sarah set herself to the parish school Saturday shell class at the south porch of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Teifi, for the 6 village girls Mrs. Gwynfryn had named at the Friday following accounts: Bronwyn Penmaen Coast, the steward's eldest 11, Letitia Price Aaron, the curate's daughter 12, Hetty Aberporth, the butler's niece 10, Faith Glyndwr Carmarthen, the Carmarthen solicitor's grandchild come down from Carmarthen at her aunt's house at Wynne 11, Sophie Gwynfryn, Mrs. Gwynfryn's own niece by marriage from the South Parsonage cottage 9, and Bryony Carew Tenby, the small grandchild of a Cardigan widow, lately come down at the South Village 10. The 6 village girls stood at the south porch of St. Mary's of the first Saturday morning of February in their plain, dark Sunday wool, with small, clean linen pinafores at the bodice, and Sarah at her plain, dark morning gabardine and a cardigan bay shawl of plain grey wool at her shoulders, took them down the south footpath to the Aberystwyth pier foot at the low tide. She gave to each girl a small clean linen bag at the wrist and a small slate at the pinafore pocket and a soft pencil stub, and she showed them at the wet pier foot rocks how to gather the small dog whelks, Nucella lepillis, at the lee side of the limpet clusters at the half-tide line, and how to gather the common periwinkles, Littorina littorea, at the high-tide weed line above the dog whelk band. She had them at the south porch on the return walk lay the small wet shells in 2 rows on a clean linen cloth on the porch bench, the dog whelks at the south row, the periwinkles at the north row. And she taught them to read at the shells the 4 small Welsh coast facts of difference. The dog whelk shell is roughly ridged at the outer whorl, whilst the periwinkle shell is smoothly ribbed. The dog whelk aperture is toothed at the inner lip, whilst the periwinkle aperture is plain. The dog whelk feeds at the limpet at the half-tide rocks, a small carnivore of the rock band, whilst the periwinkle grazes at the weed at the high-tide line, a small herbivore of the weed band. The dog whelk shell is shorter and squatter at the spire, whilst the periwinkle shell is taller and more pointed. She had them at the south porch slate, each draw a small, careful outline of 1 dog whelk and 1 periwinkle in soft pencil, and she had them at the south porch say back to her the Linnean binomial of each shell, Nucella lepillis for the dog whelk, Littorina littorea for the common periwinkle, until the small Welsh coast voices at the south porch had the 2 binomials settled at the tongue. Little Hetty Aberporth at the south end of the porch bench, who had a small clean dog whelk at her cupped palm, looked up at Sarah at the south porch and asked at her gentle small voice whether the dog whelk should be gathered at every low tide of the Welsh coast year, and Sarah at the south porch told her in the same gentle plain register that the dog whelk should be gathered at the spring tides of February and March and April at the pier foot, and at the autumn tides of September and October at the South Teifi estuary, but not at the summer high-water months, when the dog whelk withdraws to the deeper rock pools at the low-tide reach. Bronwyn Penmaen Coast, at the north end of the bench, wrote the 4 points on her slate at her own neat steward's daughter hand, and showed it at Sarah at the porch bench at her shoulder. The class was dismissed at the close of the morning, and the 6 girls walked back at 2s along the South Village footpath with small, clean linen bags of shells at their wrists for the parish school cabinet at the South Porch Vestry. Letitia Price Aaron, at the small parish school cabinet of the South Porch Vestry, took the small linen pinafore pocket and laid the small dog whelks at the south compartment of the small Welsh pine drawer, and the small periwinkles at the north compartment, with the small brass tag of plain Welsh coast hand at each compartment for Nucella lepillis and Littorina littorea, at her father the curate's gentle Welsh recommendation. Faith Glyndwr Carmarthen at the south porch step said gentle at her small Welsh Carmarthen voice that she should write at her grandfather Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at the Carmarthen chambers of the small dog whelk lesson at the south porch of St. Mary's, and Sarah at the south porch step said gentle at her own steady Welsh coast voice that she should be glad at the Carmarthen letter, and would write at her own hand a small gentle line at the close of the small parish school morning for the Cardiganshire post bag at the Tuesday following. Mr. Penmaen Coast, the steward walked Sarah at her plain morning gabardine, the home pasture of 152 acres of cliff-top sheep-walk at the south boundary on the Monday following, naming at each stone wall the small Cardiganshire ewe flock that had wintered at the south fold, and the small Welsh coast lamb crop of the south spring fold at the small dry stone south boundary above the bay. The small parish school cabinet at the south porch vestry was a plain Welsh pine press of 3 drawers set at the south wall of the small vestry under the small leaded south window, given at the parish by the late Sir Augustus Wynne at the year of the south aisle re-roofing of 1798 for the small Welsh coast parish school use of the south porch curacy. Sarah had, at the close of the first Saturday shell class at the south porch vestry, taken the small brass tag pen at her late great-aunt's plain steady italic, and tagged the small south compartment of the second drawer at Nucella lepillis, Dogwelk, Aberystwyth, Pierfoot Rocks, and the small north compartment of the second drawer at Littorina littorea, Common Periwinkle, Aberystwyth, Pierfoot Rocks. Reverend Price Aaron at the south porch vestry door had stood at the small Welsh coast curate's plain dark gown with his small steady Welsh coast smile, and had said gentle at Sarah's left elbow that the parish school cabinet at the south porch vestry should at the small Welsh coast year carry the small Cardiganshire children deeper at the Linnean cataloguing than at any South Cardigan parish at his knowledge. The Saturday shell class at the south porch of St. Mary's was repeated at the second Saturday of February, at the second springtide of the South Welsh Coast calendar, and at the second Saturday of March at the third springtide, with the 6 small village girls settled now at the small Linnean binomials of the Dogwelk and the Periwinkle, and at the small Welsh Coast cataloguing of the parish school cabinet at the south porch vestry. By the third Saturday of March, the small parish school cabinet held 27 small clean dog whelks at the south compartment and 31 small clean periwinkles at the north compartment, with the small brass tag of plain Welsh coast hand at each compartment for Nucella lepillis and Littorina littorea at Reverend Price Aaron's gentle Welsh approval at the small Sunday South Chancel announcement. The week of the spring equinox came down soft and bright over the Cardigan Bay, the Welsh coast primroses opening at the south hedge bank, and Sarah at the South Library opened on the Wednesday of that week, the 22nd of March of the year 1820, the green leather shell cabinet ledger of Mrs. Honoria Wynne at the page she had not yet at her cataloguing reached, which was the page of the 14th of May, 1791. The page held a single ledger entry at the late lady's plain, steady italic, Equipecten opicularis, Queen Scallop, Aberystwyth Pierfoot Rocks at the spring tide of the forenoon, gathered at the half-tide line at the south reef. And, at the margin of the page, in the same gentle italic, a longer marginal note Sarah had not at any forenoon yet seen. The marginal note read, "This 14th of May, 1791, the morning of dear Octavius's marriage, to my niece Mrs. Honoria Price Wynne at St. Michael's of Aberystwyth. I have at this hour gathered a perfect queen scallop at the Aberystwyth Pierfoot Rocks. My niece's first child shall have her own queen scallop at the Cardigan Bay in her own time. The shell cabinets shall stand at the South Library for that hand. H. U. Star. Sarah read the note at the South Library writing table once at her gentle Welsh coast hand, and then again at the second pass at the steady italic, and the small, clean physics of the morning settled at the South Library, as if the slate-grey Cardigan Bay at the south sash had at the spring forenoon come in at the leaded glass. The queen scallop on the May tide of 1791 had been gathered at the pier foot at the very forenoon of her father's marriage to her mother at St. Michael's of Aberystwyth. Her father the Reverend Octavius Wynne of the Aberystwyth parsonage, her mother Mrs. Honoria Wynne, née Price of Cardigan, the wedding her own house had told her of at the small painted miniature on the south parlour mantel of the Aberystwyth parsonage every year of her own life. She was the niece's first child of the marginal note. The queen scallop at the Aberystwyth Pierfoot was her own, set down at the South Library cabinet by her late great-aunt's hand at the very forenoon of her parents' marriage, against the day of the present hand at this writing table, and the shell cabinets of the South Library at Wynne Court had stood for 30 years at her late great-aunt's settled wish for the hand that now turned the green leather page. The brass caliper at her right elbow, the bone inkstand at the right corner of the writing table, the green leather correspondence bundle of Mr. Turton in the bottom drawer, the 3 Welsh oak presses at the south wall. All of it had stood by the late lady's steady Welsh coast forethought for her. Sarah closed the ledger gentle at the South Library writing table, and stood silent at the south sash of the South Library. The Cardigan Bay washed at the cliff-foot rocks below, at the slow spring-tide ebb. The small, clean Welsh coast spring forenoon settled at the south sash, the small leaded panes at the south window showing the slate-grey bay against the small, soft Welsh coast cloud at the south horizon. Mrs. Gwynfryn at the south end of the housekeeper's brick hob, for she had come up at the forenoon with a small earthenware jug of warm Cardigan Bay seed cake milk for Sarah's nuncheon at the small south table, stood silent at the brick hob with the jug at her plum bombazine arm, and did not at the moment of silence speak. The small Welsh coast brick hob warmth at Sarah's right shoulder, the small slate-grey bay at the south sash at her left elbow, the small green leather ledger closed at the South Library writing table behind her. The small, clean Cardiganshire morning held at the South Library a small, clean, steady span. The Lady Day quarter day fell on Saturday the 25th of March, and Mr. Penmaen Coast at his plain steward's coat brought up the home pasture rents of the small Cardiganshire cliff-top sheep-walk and the South Tayfar estuary, water meadow tenants, and the small East Apple Orchard cottage at the South Orchard wall to the South Library writing table in clean linen bags, and laid them at the green baize tray at Sarah's right hand for the green leather rental book at the late lady's plain steady italic at the second column of the rental page. In the middle week of April, Mr. Aberporth, the butler, brought down at Sarah's request from the South Chamber strongbox the small Carmarthen pearl set of the Wynne family, a single string of Carmarthen river pearls and a small matching pair of pearl eardrops, set at Carmarthen in the year 1788 for the late Sir Augustus Wynne's bride, Mrs. Honoria Wynne. And Sarah laid them gentle at the velvet-lined writing-table tray at the South Library, the small plain Welsh pearls of the riverbed at Carmarthen, quietly resting at the cream velvet against the day they should at the small steady Cardiganshire forethought of the late lady come at her own throat at the south porch. On the Wednesday of the same week, the 12th of April, Sarah set the 6 village girls at the south porch shell class at a small Welsh Coast wildflower album of plain-pressed primrose and Cardigan Bay seathrift at their slates, with 3 of Aesop's fables, the hare and the tortoise, the ant and the grasshopper, the boy who cried wolf, read aloud at her own gentle hand at the south porch bench afterwards for the small parish school morning, the small village girls at the south porch bench at their plain dark Wednesday wool, with the small slates at their pinafore pockets, and the small Welsh Coast Aesop volume of the parish school cabinet at Sarah's plain gloved hand. By the closing week of April, with the Welsh Coast primroses thick at the south hedge bank and the early seathrift at the south cliff edge, the half-morning of 5 months at Wynne Court was at Mrs. Gwynfrin's gentle suggestion, at the housekeeper's brick hob eased a small clean degree at Sarah's wardrobe, and Sarah had Mrs. Gwynfrin's niece, Miss Glenys Gwynfrin, make up at the south sewing room a plain Welsh Coast morning gown of cream and grey sprigged muslin for the Easter Sunday south porch, cream ground at the bodice and skirt, small soft grey sprigs of Welsh Coast fieldflower at the muslin, a plain cream linen collar at the throat, and plain cream linen cuffs at the wrist, the plain Welsh Coast morning cap of the winter set by at the south chamber drawer in favour of a plain cream straw cottage bonnet with a plain narrow grey ribbon at the chin. Easter Sunday fell on the 23rd of April of the year 1820, and Sarah, at her cream and grey, sprigged muslin and her plain cream straw cottage bonnet, with a small fresh sprig of early Cardigan Bay, seathrift gathered at the south cliff edge of the home pasture, set gentle at the bodice at the small cream linen collar, walked the south footpath from Wynne Court down to St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy for the Easter service by the Reverend Price Aaron of the South Parish Curacy. Mrs. Gwynfrin, at the plum bombazine of the spring half-morning, walked at Sarah's left elbow, and Mr. Penmaen Coast, at the plain dark Sunday wool, walked at the south porch step behind. The small Welsh Coast bells of St. Mary's Tower rang out at the south churchyard yew, and the south churchyard was full of the small village of Wynne by the Tafy at their Easter Sunday best, the 6 village girls at the south porch in their plain Sunday wool with small linen pinafores, Mr. Aberporth at the south churchyard gate in his plain Sunday black, Miss Glenys Gwynfrin at the south porch with the south parsonage cottage party. The Easter service was read at the south chancel by Reverend Price Aaron at his plain black gown, the lessons of the resurrection at the south lectern, the Easter collect at the south chancel rail, and the small Welsh Coast hymn was sung at the south nave by the small village voices in the gentle 2-part Welsh harmony of the South Cardiganshire chapel custom. Sarah at the south, Wynne family pew at the second south column of the nave, kept her plain-gloved hands at the plain Welsh Coast prayer book of the late Sir Augustus Wynne, and read at the small print of the Easter collect at her own gentle, steady Welsh Coast voice, and at the Easter anthem of the south chancel. She raised at her plain, even alto the small Welsh Coast resurrection verse of Mr. Charles Wesley at the second south stanza, and at the closing benediction of the south chancel rail, she bowed at her plain cream straw cottage bonnet at the south chancel, and stood gentle at the south pew door for the south aisle procession at the close of the small Welsh Coast Easter service. The service was dismissed at the south chancel, and the small Welsh Coast congregation came out at the south porch into the spring-bright Cardiganshire morning, and Sarah at the south porch step, in her cream and grey, sprigged muslin with the small sprig of early seathrift at the bodice, was met at the south porch by Reverend Price Aaron of the plain black gown, who had at his elbow a tall, lean gentleman of about 40 in a plain honey-fawn morning coat. The tall, lean gentleman inclined gentle at the south porch step. Sir Octavius Lloyd Penmaen was tall, lean 6'1", dark chestnut hair, lately silvering at the temples. calm grey-blue eyes the colour of Cardigan Bay at autumn, weathered fair Oxford-trained complexion, plain honey-fawn morning coat over plain cream waistcoat, the silver Lloyd Penmaen signet on his right hand. He stood at the south porch step in the plain Easter Sunday morning of the spring-bright Cardiganshire weather, with the small, steady gentleness of a Cardigan Bay landowner of 40 years standing at the coast above Aberavon, and the small, clean Welsh coast spring breeze at the south porch yew, lifted softly at the plain honey-fawn morning coat at the shoulder. Lady Gwendolen Lloyd Penmaen, of 8 years, at his left elbow, in a small plain cream and white Welsh coast Easter Sunday muslin, and a small plain cream straw cottage bonnet of the same Welsh coast country pattern as Sarah's own, stood gentle at her father's left hand at the south porch step, and at her own small clean Welsh coast voice said gentle at Sarah at the south porch a small clean "Good Easter, Miss Wynne," at the small steady Lloyd Penmaen Hall manor of the small Welsh coast daughter of a Fellow of the Linnean Society of London. Reverend Price Aaron, at his plain black gown, said gentle at the south porch, "Miss Wynne, Sir Octavius Aubrey Lloyd Penmaen, 5th Baronet Lloyd Penmaen of Lloyd Penmaen Hall, 10 miles north on the Cardigan Bay coast above Aberavon. Sir Octavius is the lay patron of the Wynne living and a Fellow of the Linnean Society of London these 5 years past." Sir Octavius, at the south porch, step in the plain honey-fawn morning coat, inclined gentle at Sarah, and at the small clean south porch step, he said at his plain Oxford-trained voice that he had known the late Mrs. Honoria Wynne at the Conchology subscription list of the Linnean Society of London in the 5 years 1814 to 1819, and that he had at the parish school inspection of the south porch of St. Mary's of September last seen at the Reverend Price Aaron's hand a single page of Mrs. Wynne's shell cabinet ledger of the South Library at Wynne Court, and had remarked at the south porch on that September forenoon the Oxford quality observation of the late lady's italic. He had not, at any of the 5 months since the late lady's death at Wynne, expected to see, at the south porch of St. Mary's, the hand that would continue the ledger at the South Library. Sarah, at her plain Welsh coast gravity, in the cream and grey, sprigged muslin and the small sprig of sea thrift at the bodice, met Sir Octavius's calm, grey-blue Cardigan Bay eyes at the south porch step, and said at her own gentle, even voice, "Sir Octavius, the shell cabinet at Wynne. I shall continue at my late great-aunt's settled wish." Sir Octavius. Lloyd Penmaen's carriage came up the south drive of Wynne Court on the gentle Saturday afternoon of the 6th of May, 1820, in the level Cardiganshire fashion the Wynne family kept all their days, and Sarah, who had been at the South Library at her Greencalf Conchology Journal, entering the Friday before, banded wedge shell from the Aberystwyth pier foot, set the small brass caliper gentle at the velvet cabinet tray, and went out to the south porch with Mrs. Gwynfryn at her quiet shoulder. Sir Octavius stepped down first, plain honey-fawn morning coat over plain cream waistcoat, the silver Lloyd Penmaen signet on his right hand, calm grey-blue eyes the colour of Cardigan Bay at autumn, and offered his hand at the carriage step to a small girl in soft cream Cardiganshire muslin with grey ribbons at her sleeves. Lady Gwendolen Lloyd Penmaen, 8, was small and slight, soft auburn at the nape, the same calm grey-blue eyes as her father, a plain straw bonnet at her hand with grey ribbons at the brim. Behind her came Lady Bronwen Lloyd Penmaen Carew, 40, Sir Octavius's married sister, plain dark plum silk over cream Cardiganshire muslin, the small Lloyd Penmaen pearl at her throat, calm grey-blue Lloyd Penmaen eyes, soft chestnut at her nape under a plain plum bonnet. Mr. Carew Cardigan, her husband, 44, plain dark wool morning coat, plain cream waistcoat, calm dark eyes, the gentle Carmarthenshire courtesy at his hand. And the Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen at 66, in plain dove-grey silk, with the small Lloyd Penmaen pearls at her throat, soft white hair at the nape under a plain dove-grey lace cap, calm grey eyes, gentle Welsh coast gravity at her gloved hand. Mrs. Gwynfryn received them at the south porch and showed them through the panelled corridor to the south library. The long room of the south light Sarah had kept at the Cardigan Bay sash all the long winter and spring lately past. The May sun lay quiet at the slate of the library floor. The 3 shell cabinets of Mrs. Honoria's 1789 to 1819 collection stood at the south wall in the level Cardiganshire fashion she'd kept all her days. Sarah's 4 green calf conchology journals lay at the south writing table beside Mr. Turton's 1819 Conchological Dictionary and Mr. Montague's 1803 Testacea Britannica. Tea had been laid at the small round table at the south sash by Mr. Aberporth. Plain Carmarthen china, the small silver Wynne tea service, plain seed cake at a cream plate. Lady Gwendolen, at her father's hand, went gentle at the velvet cabinet tray, and stood quiet at the queen scallop drawer. And Sir Octavius bent at the little girl's shoulder, and named for her the queen scallop, the dog cockle, the painted top shell, the dog whelk. Lady Bronwyn and Mr. Carew Cardigan stood at the south sash and looked at the Cardigan Bay in the gentle May sun. The Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen sat at the south chair Mrs. Gwynfryn drew for her, and watched Sarah with the quiet Lloyd Penmaen gravity of 66 years at the hall. Sarah, in plain half-mourning grey Cardiganshire muslin, lately come at the Abereran seamstress, poured the tea in the level Cardiganshire fashion her late mother Mrs. Honoria Wynne, née Price, had taught her at the Aberystwyth Parsonage south parlour. She set the small Carmarthen cup at the Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen's hand first, then Lady Bronwyn, then Mr. Carew Cardigan, then Sir Octavius, then a small cup of plain milk for Lady Gwendolen at the velvet cabinet tray. The seed cake she cut in 8 quiet wedges at the cream plate. Sir Octavius turned from the second shell cabinet at the velvet cabinet tray, and stood quiet at the south sash with his small Carmarthen cup at his hand. He looked at the long line of cabinets at the south wall, and at Sarah's 4 green calf journals at the south writing table, and at the Turton and the Montague, open at their queen scallop and mitre shell pages, and the gentle Welsh coast colour came up at his weathered fair Oxford-trained complexion in the level Lloyd Penmaen fashion he had kept all his days. "Miss Wynne," he said in the quiet Welsh coast cadence the South Library kept, "I have come at my sister's hand, and at my mother's hand, and at Lady Gwendolen's hand on the gentle May Saturday, to ask whether you might lay out a small Cardigan Bay shell collection demonstration at the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall. My sister at the Abereran Parish School has lately come down at the gentle wish of the Saturday shell class you have kept at the Aberystwyth Pierfoot, and the Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen at the south sash of the hall has come at the same gentle wish." Lady Gwendolen, at the velvet cabinet tray, turned her small grey-blue eyes up at her father, and then at Sarah, and the soft auburn at the nape of her plain straw bonnet caught the south light at the Cardigan Bay sash. "Miss Wynne," she said in the small clear voice of 8 at the South Library, "Papa has the queen scallop and the dog cockle and the painted top shell at the south cabinet at home, but he has not the velvet cabinet tray, and he has not the green calf cataloguing journal. May I help with the cataloguing?" Sarah set the small silver teapot, quiet at the small round table, and stood quiet at the south sash, a gentle moment in the level Cardiganshire fashion Mrs. Honoria had kept all her days, and she looked at Lady Gwendolen at the velvet cabinet tray, and at Sir Octavius at the south sash, and at the long line of cabinets at the south wall. "Sir Octavius," she said in the gentle Welsh coast cadence the South Library kept, "I shall be glad. Lady Gwendolen, you shall have your own small green calf cataloguing journal at my hand at the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall, and the small brass caliper at your hand at the velvet cabinet tray, in the level Cardiganshire fashion my own late great-aunt Mrs. Honoria Wynne kept at the South Library of Wynne Court all her days." The Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen at the south chair set her small Carmarthen cup quiet at the small round table, and the gentle Lloyd Penmaen gravity at her grey eyes came up at Sarah at the south sash with the quiet approval the 66 years at Lloyd Penmaen Hall had taught her to keep. Lady Bronwyn at the south sash turned at her husband's shoulder, and Mr. Carew Cardigan at the small round table inclined his head at the gentle Carmarthenshire courtesy his Cardigan boyhood had taught him. The Tuesday calls at the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall began at the cool Tuesday morning of the 9th of May. The Lloyd Penmaen carriage at the South Drive of Wynne Court at the gentle Welsh coast hour, the 18-mile North Drive at the Cardigan Bay coast, above Abereron, the South Library of the Hall at the late Tuesday morning. Miss Glenys Gwynfryn at Sarah's quiet shoulder, at the gentle chaperone's chair at the south sash. Lady Gwendolen at the velvet cabinet tray, with her own small green calf cataloguing journal at the south writing table, the small brass caliper at her small careful hand. Sir Octavius at his own south writing table at the long Lloyd Penmaen South Library, with the open page of his privately printed 1817 notes on Cardigan Bay, shell species, at Lloyd Penmaen Hall. Aberystwyth, 42 pages, the gentle Welsh coast printer's plain dark wool covers. Sarah read the privately printed notes through at the cool May Tuesdays and the warm June Tuesdays at the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall. The 42 pages of the gentle Welsh coast conchology Sir Octavius had kept at the Cardigan Bay, above Abereron at the 7 years lately past, the Queen Scallop at the Pierfoot Rocks of Abereron, the Dog Cockle at the South Sand of New Quay, the painted top shell at the rock pools of Lannon, the banded wedge shell at the gentle May low tides, the dog whelk and the dog periwinkle at the cool rocks of the Lloyd Penmaen shore. Sir Octavius at his south writing table read at Mr. Turton's 1819 Conchological Dictionary, the gentle clauses of the British coast species at Sarah's quiet hand, and Lady Gwendolen at the velvet cabinet tray entered the Queen Scallop and the Dog Cockle at her own small green calf cataloguing journal in the small, careful 8-year hand the gentle Welsh coast morning had taught her. Miss Glenys Gwynfryn at the gentle chaperone's chair at the south sash kept her own small piece of plain Cardiganshire cross-stitch at her hand, and the gentle Welsh coast silence at her quiet eye, the level Cardiganshire fashion the Gwynfryn family had kept at the South Library of Wynne Court all their days. On the gentle Tuesday morning of the 23rd of May, 1820, at the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall, the cool Cardigan Bay air at the south sash and the warm beeswax candle at the south writing table, and the small, careful 8-year hand of Lady Gwendolen at the velvet cabinet tray, entering the painted top shell at her small green calf cataloguing journal. Sir Octavius, at his own south writing table, looked up at Sarah at the south writing table at the open page of his privately printed notes, and said in the gentle Welsh coast cadence the South Library kept, "Miss Wynne, the gentle Cardigan Bay, morning the South Library has kept at the 7 years lately past, has never been the gentle Cardigan Bay morning the South Library has kept this May. and Sarah at the south writing table set the small brass caliper gentle at the open page of the notes, and looked at Sir Octavius at the south sash, a gentle moment in the level Cardiganshire fashion. Her own late mother, Mrs. Honoria Wynne, née Price, had kept at the Aberystwyth parsonage south parlour all her days, and the small still Welsh coast moment at the south library was the gentle still moment her own quiet heart kept at the south writing table at the cool May morning at the Lloyd Penmaen's south sash. The Wednesday walks at the Lloyd Penmaen's south garden and the long Lloyd Penmaen shore began at the gentle Wednesday morning of the 10th of May, Sir Octavius at Sarah's quiet right hand, and Lady Gwendolen at her quiet left hand, and Miss Glenys Gwynfryn at the gentle chaperone's quiet pace behind them, the walled half-acre at the south wall of the hall, the small apple orchard at the east, the dry stone wall at the south cliff-top above the Tafy estuary, at the far south reach of the hall's long shore. On the gentle Wednesday morning of the 7th of June, 1820, at the dry stone wall above the Tafy estuary, at the far south reach of the Lloyd Penmaen shore, Sir Octavius, at Sarah's quiet right hand, stopped at the gentle Welsh coast dry stone wall and bent at the soft Cardigan Bay turf, and gathered a small sprig of Cardigan Bay seathrift, Armeria maritima, the pink Welsh coast cliff flower the gentle June morning had brought up at the Tafy estuary, at the small, careful Lloyd Penmaen hand. He stood quiet at the dry stone wall, a gentle Welsh coast moment, and Sarah at his quiet right hand stood quiet at the dry stone wall in the gentle Welsh coast silence the Cardigan Bay had kept at the south cliff top all the long morning, and Sir Octavius gave the small sprig of Cardigan Bay seathrift at Sarah's quiet hand in the gentle Welsh coast silence the south cliff top kept. Sarah took the small sprig at her quiet hand and laid it gentle at the small linen pouch she had brought down at the south library, the small linen pouch with the small conchology pencil cleaning cloth, the green calf cataloguing journal kept at the south writing table, and set the pouch at the small inner pocket of her plain half-mourning grey Cardiganshire muslin pelisse. The Tuesday calls at the south library and the Wednesday walks at the long Lloyd Penmaen shore kept the gentle Welsh coast pace at the cool May mornings and the warm June mornings, and at the gentle Saturday afternoon of the 24th of June, 1820, at the South Library of Wynne Court, at the Cardigan Bay. Sash Sir Octavius came down at the carriage, and Mrs. Gwynfryn received him at the south porch, and Sir Octavius at the South Library asked Sarah at the south writing table whether she might receive his Saturday calls at the South Library of Wynne Court at the gentle Saturday afternoons of the warm July following, and Sarah at the south writing table set the small brass caliper gentle at the velvet cabinet tray, and said in the gentle Welsh coast cadence the South Library kept, "Sir Octavius, I shall." The Saturday calls at the South Library of Wynne Court began at the gentle Saturday afternoon of the 1st of July, 1820, at 3. The carriage at the South Drive at the gentle Welsh coast July afternoon, and Mrs. Gwynfryn at the South Porch, and Mr. Aberporth at the South Library, with the tea service at the small round table at the South Sash. Sarah at the South writing table at her green calf conchology journal. Sir Octavius at his quiet hand at the South Library entering the dog whelk and the dog periwinkle, and the common limpet at the small, careful Lloyd Penmaen hand. The Saturday calls of the 8th of July, of the 15th of July, of the 22nd of July, of the 29th of July, kept the gentle Welsh coast pace at the South Library all the warm afternoons. Miss Glenys Gwynfryn at the gentle chaperone's chair at the South Sash, and her quiet piece of plain Cardiganshire cross-stitch at her hand. On the gentle Saturday afternoon of the 5th of August, 1820, at 3. Sir Octavius came down at the carriage at the south drive of Wynne Court, and Mrs. Gwynfryn at the south porch, and Mr. Aberporth at the south library, at the small round table at the Cardigan Bay sash. Sir Octavius at the south library stood at the south sash, a gentle Welsh coast moment, with the Cardigan Bay at the far foot of the cliff, and the gentle August sun at the Welsh coast slate of the library floor, and the 3 Lloyd Penmaen cabinet trays of Mrs. Honoria's collection at the south wall, and he turned at the south sash and looked at Sarah at the south writing table, at her green calf conchology journal, at the open page of the Queen Scallop, and the gentle Welsh coast colour came up at his weathered fair Oxford-trained complexion in the level Lloyd Penmaen fashion he had kept all his days. "Miss Wynne," he said in the quiet, Welsh coast cadence the South Library kept, "I have come on the gentle August Saturday at the South Library, at the Cardigan Bay, sash at the gentle Welsh coast pace, the cool May Tuesdays and the warm June Wednesdays, and the gentle July Saturdays have lately taught me to keep. The South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall has never been the South Library it has kept these 4 months past. I have come, having read with measured admiration the careful Cardigan Bay shell cabinet at your hand these 4 years, to ask you to consider whether you might be the next Lady Lloyd Penmaen at the gentle Welsh coast pace your own Turton correspondence has taught me to admire. Lady Gwendolen at the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall has kept the small green calf cataloguing journal at her own small careful hand at the cool May mornings past, and the Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen at the south sash of the hall has lately come down at the gentle wish of the same. I have come at my own hand at the gentle Welsh coast pace the South Library has kept. I shall keep the answer at your own gentle Welsh coast pace. Sarah at the south writing table set the small brass caliper gentle at the velvet cabinet tray, and stood quiet at the south writing table, a gentle Welsh coast moment, at the open page of the Queen Scallop in the level Cardiganshire fashion. Her own late mother, Mrs. Honoria Wynne, née Price, had kept at the Aberystwyth parsonage south parlour all her days. The gentle August sun at the Welsh coast slate of the library floor, the small still Cardigan Bay at the far foot of the cliff, the 3 Lloyd Penmaen cabinet trays at the south wall, and Sarah at the south writing table looked at Sir Octavius at the south sash and said in the gentle Welsh coast cadence, the South Library of Wynne Court had kept all her great-aunt's days. Sir Octavius, I shall. Lady Gwendolen, who had ridden down at the carriage with her father at the gentle August Saturday, and had been quiet at the south porch with Mrs. Gwynfryn at her quiet shoulder, came in at the South Library door at the gentle 8-year pace the South Corridor had taught her, and looked at her father at the south sash, and at Sarah at the south writing table, and the gentle small grey-blue eyes, the colour of Cardigan Bay at autumn, came up at the south light, and the small auburn nape of her plain straw bonnet caught the south sun. "Miss Wynne," she said in the small clear voice of 8 at the South Library, "Papa shall keep the Queen Scallop and the dog cockle and the painted top shell at the south cabinet of Lloyd Penmaen Hall, and you shall keep the small brass caliper and the green calf cataloguing journal at the south writing table, and I shall keep the small green calf cataloguing journal at the velvet cabinet tray. I shall be glad. Reverend Price Aaron at the south porch of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy called the banns at the gentle Sunday morning of the 13th of August, 1820, and at the gentle Sunday morning of the 20th of August, and at the gentle Sunday morning of the 27th of August, the 3 plain Welsh coast Sundays the parish kept, in the level Cardiganshire fashion the Wynne parish had kept, at the small slate church above the Tafy estuary, all the long centuries past. On the gentle Saturday morning of the 9th of September, 1820 at 10, the parish church of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy, above the Tafy estuary, opened at the south porch at the cool September Welsh coast air. The small slate and limewash church of the long Cardiganshire centuries at the south cliff top above the level. Tafy, Reverend Price Aaron at the chancel step in plain black gown with the small slate Welsh coast cross of the parish at the chancel screen behind him. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at the south porch in plain dark wool with the small gold spectacles at his quiet hand. Mrs. Gwynfryn at the south pew in plum bombazine, and Mr. Penman Coast in plain dark coat, and Mr. Aberporth in plain black tailcoat. Miss Glenys Gwynfryn at her quiet hand. Lady Gwendolen at the south chancel pew in soft cream Cardiganshire muslin with grey ribbons at her sleeves and a small sprig of late summer Cardigan Bay, sea thrift at her plain straw bonnet, at the gentle hand of her grandmother. The Dowager Lady, Lloyd Penmaen at the south chancel pew in plain dove-grey silk with the small Lloyd Penmaen pearls at her throat. Lady Bronwyn and Mr. Carew Cardigan at the south chancel pew at her gentle shoulder. Mrs. Penmaen Bay, the village dressmaker at the small slate cottage at the south lane of Wynne by the Tafy, had cut the bride's plain cream Cardiganshire muslin at the gentle 6 weeks lately past, plain long sleeves at the gentle Welsh coast cuff, plain bodice at the small late summer sprig of Cardigan Bay, sea thrift gathered at the gentle Wednesday morning of the 7th of June at the Lloyd Penmaen shore, and lately come down at the small linen pouch of the South Library, the small white and cream rose, lately come at the south garden of Wynne Court, at the small bodice at Mrs. Gwynfryn's gentle hand. The Wynne pearls, Carmarthen, 1788, lately come down at Mrs. Honoria's small velvet pearl case at the south writing table, at Sarah's gentle throat. Ivory silk gloves at her gentle hands at the south porch. The small silver locket of Sarah's late mother, Mrs. Honoria Wynne, née Price at the small inner pocket of the plain cream Cardiganshire muslin at her gentle, quiet heart. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen at the south porch. Sarah had asked him at the gentle Saturday calls of the warm July. Gave the bride away at the chancel step at the gentle Welsh coast cadence Carmarthen had taught him at the long 40 years past, and Reverend Price Aaron at the chancel step read the gentle Welsh coast marriage service the parish had kept at the small slate church all the long Cardiganshire centuries past, and Sir Octavius at the chancel step in plain dark wool morning coat over plain cream waistcoat with the silver Lloyd Penmaen signet on his right hand, spoke his vows at the gentle Welsh coast cadence the South Library of Lloyd Penmaen Hall had taught him to keep, and Sarah at the chancel step at the plain cream Cardiganshire muslin spoke her vows at the gentle Welsh coast cadence the south parlour of the Aberystwyth parsonage had taught her to keep. The wedding breakfast at the south dining room of Wynne Court was the plain Welsh coast wedding breakfast Mrs. Honoria Wynne had kept at the small Cardiganshire scale all her days. Plain Cardigan Bay, salmon at the plain Carmarthen plate, plain Welsh coast lamb at the small silver platter, plain seed cake at the cream plate, plain Carmarthen claret at the small Welsh coast glasses. Mr. Aberporth at the south door, and Mrs. Gwynfryn at the south sideboard, and Miss Glenys Gwynfryn at the south sash. Lady Gwendolen at her father's quiet right hand, the small auburn nape of her plain straw bonnet at the south light, the Dowager Lady Lloyd Penmaen at the south chair, Lady Bronwyn and Mr. Carew Cardigan at her gentle shoulder. Mr. Glyndwr Carmarthen with the small gold spectacles at his quiet hand. Reverend Price Aaron at the gentle Welsh coast grace. If you have kept the gentle Welsh coast Cardigan Bay, morning at the South Library of Wynne Court, at the long 4 months past at Sarah's quiet hand, the chapel bell at the small slate church of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy, has at the gentle Saturday morning of the 9th of September kept the level Cardiganshire fashion, the Wynne family kept all their days. The gentle Welsh coast morning has kept its quiet keeping at your hand at the gentle ear, and the small green calf cataloguing journal at the south writing table of Lloyd Penmaen Hall is the gentle Welsh coast keeping the South Library shall keep at the long days coming. Keep the gentle Welsh coast morning at the small slate church at your quiet ear, and the small careful green calf cataloguing journal at your quiet hand. And so, on the gentle September morning of the 9th September, 1820, in the parish church of St. Mary's of Wynne by the Tafy, in the level Cardiganshire fashion, the Wynne family kept all their days. Miss Sarah Wynne, who had sat at the south parlour of the Aberystwyth parsonage on the gentle Saturday morning of the 20th of November, and finished the Queen Scallop cataloguing at her green calf conchology journal, became, by the patient asking of the 5th Baronet Lloyd Penmaen, the 7th Lady Lloyd Penmaen of Lloyd Penmaen Hall, in the level Cardiganshire fashion, her own late mother, Mrs. Honoria Wynne, née Price, had kept all her days.